She had been on her feet for 11 hours when he walked in. The rain outside was the kind that didn't announce itself. It just arrived cold and indifferent, turning the parking lot of Millbrook Diner into a shallow mirror. Nora Callahan had 40 minutes left on her shift, a blister forming on her left heel, and exactly $14 in tips folded inside the pocket of her apron. She was not thinking about her future. She was thinking about whether the coffee in pot 3 had been sitting long enough to turn bitter, and whether the couple in booth 6 would actually leave a decent tip, or just smile at her the way people smiled when they wanted to feel good about themselves without spending anything extra. Then the door opened, and the man stepped in out of the rain, and something in the room changed, not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies. It was subtler than that. The ambient noise dipped for half a second. Two of the other waitresses glanced up. Then everyone went back to what they were doing, because the man looked like exactly the kind of person who didn't want to be looked at. Nora grabbed a menu and went to seat him. She had no idea who he was. She would learn later, much later, when everything had already been set in motion, that his name was Caleb Weston, and that he ran a privately held firm worth somewhere north of $4 billion, and that he hadn't eaten at a diner in over a decade. None of that mattered to her in that moment. What mattered was that he looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, and that he was sitting alone, and that he ordered a black coffee and a bowl of soup like a man who had forgotten how hungry he was. She said, "I'll have that right out for you." He said nothing. He just nodded and looked back out at the rain. That was how it started. Not with fireworks, not with fate announcing itself. Just a man in a wet coat, a woman with sore feet, and a bowl of soup on a rainy Thursday night in a town that neither of them was supposed to be in. Part 1. Millbrook was not the kind of town people ended up in on purpose. It sat 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, tucked between two low hills that blocked enough wind in winter to make it livable, and enough sunlight in summer to make it pretty in a faded, unpretentious sort of way. There was a hardware store that had been in the same family for 3 generations. There was a gas station with a lottery machine that people played out of habit rather than hope. There was a park with a gazebo where the high school band performed on the 4th of July, and there was Millbrook Diner, which had been open since 1971, and which smelled, no matter the season, of bacon grease and fresh pie, and something warm that didn't have a name but felt something like home. Nora Callahan had grown up 2 blocks from that diner. She had bussed tables there at 16 to help her mother cover the electric bill. She had left at 22 with a scholarship to study hospitality management at a state school 3 hours away, full of plans and a specific kind of optimism that belongs exclusively to young women who have worked very hard and believe for a brief and luminous window of time that the world will meet them halfway. The world had not quite met her halfway. It hadn't been catastrophic. That was the thing nobody told you about disappointment. The really corrosive kind wasn't the dramatic variety, wasn't the sudden loss or the spectacular failure. It was the slow accumulation of small concessions. The job in Pittsburgh that turned out to be nothing like the description. The apartment she'd shared with 2 roommates until one moved out and the other stopped paying rent. The relationship that had lasted 3 years before quietly expiring, not in a fight or a revelation, but in the gradual recognition that they were 2 people who had stopped choosing each other. And then her mother's diagnosis, not life-threatening but chronic, the kind of condition that required management medication, regular appointments, and the consistent presence of someone who gave a damn. So Nora had come back to Millbrook. That had been 4 years ago. She was 32 now. She didn't think of herself as someone whose life had gone wrong. She thought of herself as someone in a holding pattern, not crashed, not lost, just circling, waiting for the right moment to land somewhere new. In the meantime, she worked doubles at Millbrook Diner 5 days a week, drove her mother to appointments on Tuesdays, and spent her Sunday afternoons reading the business management books. She still checked out from the county library more out of habit than ambition, the way some people keep running shoes they haven't laced up in months. She was good at her job, genuinely good, not in the way that meant she was merely competent, but in the way that meant customers noticed. She remembered orders without writing them down. She remembered that old Mr. Hargrove liked his coffee with exactly 1 sugar, and that the woman in the corner booth every Wednesday was lactose intolerant, but always forgot to specify, so Nora would bring her the oat milk option without being asked. She could read the temperature of a table, whether people wanted conversation or quiet, whether the couple had been arguing before they walked in, whether a solo diner needed the check quickly, or was grateful for somewhere to be. It was a skill she'd cultivated without quite meaning to a fine attunement to the emotional frequencies of a room. Her colleagues respected her in a way that sometimes tipped into something more complicated. Brianna, who was 24 and working at the diner while she figured out what came next, looked up to Nora in the earnest way of someone who hadn't yet learned that admiration can be its own kind of distance. Derek! The line cook liked her because she never sent back orders without a good reason, and because she once stood her ground with a regional manager who'd tried to cut their break times during a holiday rush. Sandra, who owned the diner and had known Nora's mother for 30 years, sometimes looked at Nora with an expression that mixed fondness and something that might have been sadness, the way you look at a garden that should be bigger than it is. The night Caleb Weston walked in, Nora had just finished de-escalating a situation at table 9. A family of 4 parents, 2 kids under 10, had ordered the wrong thing, then disagreed about whether to send it back, and the tension had metastasized until the younger child started crying, and the father's voice went the particular flat quiet that meant he was embarrassed and taking it out on the closest available target. Nora had appeared before the storm fully broke, refilled everyone's water, offered the kids a side of fries on the house, and somehow shifted the mood in the time it took to say 3 sentences. She was still recalibrating when she heard the bell above the door and looked up. The man was tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair that had gone silver at the temples in a way that looked accidental rather than cultivated. He wore a charcoal overcoat that was well made, but not flashy, the kind of coat a man buys once and keeps for years. He was carrying nothing, no briefcase, no phone in his hand, which struck her as unusual. Most people who came in alone came in clutching something. This man had his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving through the room with the practiced calm of someone who spent a lot of time in environments he didn't control. He wasn't from Millbrook. She could tell that much. Not just from the coat or the posture. There was something quieter about it, the way he paused just inside the door, taking in the room without performing the act of taking it in, like a man who'd learned to assess his surroundings as a matter of course. She picked up a menu. "Just one tonight." "Just one," he said. His voice was even unhurried. She led him to the window booth, the good one with the view of the park across the street, and the rain threading down the glass, and set the menu in front of him. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please, black." "The soup tonight is tomato bisque. We make it in-house. It's good." He looked at her then briefly as if she'd said something slightly unexpected. "I'll take a bowl," he said, "and whatever your best sandwich is." "That's the Turkey Club. Comes with the house-made pickles." "Fine." She put the order in, brought the coffee, and went back to her other tables. She didn't think about him again until she brought the soup, and he said without looking up from the window, "Is it always this quiet here on Thursdays?" "Depends on the week," she said. "Football game nights it fills up. Otherwise Thursdays are slow. People are tired by Thursday." He nodded as if she'd confirmed something. "Where are you from?" he asked. It was an odd question from a stranger. Not rude exactly, just direct in a way that most people in diners weren't. "Here," she said. "Born and raised. You—" He seemed to consider whether to answer. "Pittsburgh, originally. I've been living in New York for the last 15 years. Long way from New York for a Thursday bowl of soup." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. "I had a meeting nearby. It ran long. I didn't want to drive back hungry." She left him to eat and went to close out her other tables. But something about the exchange stayed with her, not what he'd said, but the way he'd said it, the deliberateness of it. Most people made small talk at diners in the same way they held doors for strangers. It was a social reflex, something you did without thinking. This man had spoken to her like he was choosing to. She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it away and finished her shift. He left a 20 on a $14 check and was gone before she came back to the table. She stood there for a moment, looking at the bill, the untouched menu she'd left him, the empty coffee cup. Outside, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. The park across the street was empty and glistening. She folded the 20 into her apron and went to wipe down the booth. He came back on Saturday. She was on the morning shift, which meant the diner was busy in a different way. Families with weekend energy, older couples settling in for the long, slow pleasures of a breakfast they didn't have to cook. The bell above the door had been ringing constantly for 2 hours by the time he appeared, and she almost didn't notice him. Almost. He was in different clothes this time, a dark sweater, jeans, no coat. He looked less like a businessman and more like a regular person, and she realized that on Thursday she'd categorized him too quickly. He wasn't stiff or formal. He was contained. There was a difference. He sat in the same booth without being asked. "Turkey Club again," she said when she came to take his order. He looked up and there was a flicker of something across his face, recognition maybe, and something underneath it that she didn't have a word for. "You remember?" "I remember most orders," she said. "Occupational thing. Turkey Club. Please. And coffee." He paused. "What's good for breakfast?" "Depends what you're in the mood for. If you want something that'll stick with you, the short stack with the bacon. If you're more inclined towards something lighter, the vegetable omelet. Both are good. The eggs are local." "Short stack," he said. "And the Turkey Club." She raised an eyebrow. "Both. I didn't eat much yesterday." She wrote it down. "Coming up." She was 3 tables away when she heard him say quietly, to no one in particular, "You have a good memory." She glanced back. He was looking out the window again. She wasn't sure if he'd meant for her to hear it. She decided to let it sit. The third visit was a Wednesday evening, and he brought someone with him. The someone was a boy 6 years old, maybe 7, with dark eyes and a serious face that was clearly inherited and a head of unruly hair that clearly wasn't. The boy walked in ahead of the man with the careful purposefulness of a child who had been told to behave and was determined to prove he could, and he climbed into the booth seat opposite the window and folded his hands on the table in a way that was so deliberate and adult that Nora had to look away for a moment. She brought menus and crouched down to the boy's level. "Hi there. First time here?" The boy looked at her very seriously. "Yes. My dad said they have good pie." "Your dad is right. We have very good pie. What's your favorite kind?" The boy thought about this with appropriate gravity. "Apple, but only if the crust is not soggy. Ours is not soggy, I promise you." "That's what people say," the boy said skeptically. Behind him, across the table, the man who was watching this exchange with an expression Nora couldn't quite read, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Your name is?" she asked the boy. "Owen," he said. "Hi, Owen. I'm Nora. I'll take good care of you tonight." She took their orders, the Turkey Club for the man, a grilled cheese, and the promised apple pie for Owen, and went to put them in. Sandra, passing by the coffee station, looked over at the booth and then at Nora with an expression that Nora chose to ignore. When she brought Owen's grilled cheese, he examined it with the focused attention of a small scientist and then looked up at her. "You cut it diagonally," he said. "The corners are the best part," she said. "You get more of them that way." Owen looked at the sandwich for a moment, then at her. "That's actually true," he said with the air of someone revising an earlier position. She was refilling the coffee at the next table when she heard Owen say to his father in a loudly whispered tone, "She cut it the right way." The man said just as quietly, "Yes, she did." When she came back to check on them, the man she still didn't know his name. She had not asked, and he had not offered, looked up and said, "He doesn't usually warm up to people quickly." "He seems like a kid who has strong opinions," she said. "He is. He gets that from his mother." It was said simply, without drama. But something in the way he said it, the past tense, the slight catch at the word mother, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, told her everything she needed to know. She didn't say she was sorry. She'd learned over years of taking care of people that condolences from strangers, however well-meant, often landed as intrusions. What she said was, "He seems like a good kid." "He is," the man said, and his voice just then was very different from every other time he'd spoken. It was open, unguarded, like a door someone had forgotten to lock. His name was Caleb. She found that out on the 4th visit. He came in alone that time on a Friday afternoon, and the diner was half empty, and when she brought his coffee, he set down the papers he'd been reading and said, "I realized I've never introduced myself. Caleb Weston." He held out his hand. She shook it. "Nora Callahan." "How long have you worked here, Nora?" 4 years this time around. I grew up in town, worked here as a teenager, came back after..." She paused, deciding how much to say. "After things changed." He nodded. He had the quality she was noticing of listening without performing it. He didn't lean forward or nod emphatically. He just became still and attentive in a way that made you feel what you were saying actually mattered. "You're not from Millbrook," she said. "No, but I have some business interests in the area. I've been passing through more often than usual lately." He paused. "I find I keep ending up here." It was such a plain statement that it took her a moment to understand what he might mean by it. "The soup's good," she said. "It is." He agreed with that almost smile. She went to check on her other tables. At the counter, Brianna caught her eye and made a face that was equal parts question and implication. Nora shook her head very slightly. Brianna rolled her eyes. The gossip started as gossip did in Millbrook, with someone seeing something and telling someone else who told someone else until the original observation had been processed through a chain of interpretation and emerged wearing entirely different clothes. What actually happened was simple. Caleb Weston kept coming to the diner. 3 times a week, sometimes 4, always in Nora's section when she was working and sometimes on days she wasn't, which Nora learned from Brianna, who had served him twice and reported back that he'd asked what days Nora was scheduled. "He asked about your schedule," Brianna said in the flat tone of someone delivering evidence. "That could mean a lot of things," Nora said. "It means exactly one thing," Brianna said. "He's just a regular." Brianna looked at her with the patient exasperation of a 24-year-old who had no patience for willful blindness. "Nora, he drives 40 miles from Pittsburgh every other day to sit in Nora's section and have soup. The soup is genuinely good. It's not 40 miles each way good." Nora did not respond to this because she didn't have a response that would hold water, and she knew it. The truth was, she had noticed. She wasn't blind and she wasn't obtuse. She'd noticed the way he looked at her, not hungrily. Not the way some men looked at women in diners like she was an amenity. He looked at her the way you look at something you've been trying to figure out and are starting to think you might actually understand. What she felt about that was more complicated. She liked him. She could admit that much to herself in the privacy of her own head. She found him interesting and direct and oddly restful. He was one of the few people she'd ever met who seemed as comfortable with silence as she was. She liked the way he was with Owen, who came in once a week, now always serious, always with an opinion about the food that he delivered with the gravity of a restaurant critic. She liked the way Caleb listened to Owen fully, without condescension, treating the boy's 7-year-old observations about sandwich construction as if they deserved the same consideration as a board presentation. But she also knew what she was and what he was, and how those two things looked from the outside. She was a 32-year-old waitress in a diner in a town that most people had either never heard of or were trying to leave. She'd finally looked him up after the 5th visit, with the particular reluctance of someone who isn't sure they want to know the founder and CEO of Weston Capital Group, a private equity firm with offices in New York, Chicago, and London. He'd built it from nothing after business school, which made him self-made, which was somehow both better and worse than if it had been inherited. He'd been married for 8 years to a woman named Claire, an architect who had died of an aggressive cancer 2 years ago, leaving him with Owen, a penthouse apartment in Manhattan, and whatever grief looks like when you're the kind of person who processes everything internally. He had, in other words, a life that existed on an entirely different planet from hers. And so she was careful. She was warm, but professional. She was present without being forward. She let herself enjoy his company, the conversations that stretched past the time it took to drink a cup of coffee, the way he asked her questions with genuine curiosity and actually waited for the answers without letting herself lean into it. She'd made peace with a lot of things in her life. She knew how to hold something at arm's length. She thought she was doing that successfully. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in October, 3 weeks after she'd learned his name, and Nora was on a double shift because Brianna had called in sick. The diner was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that descended in October like a second weather, and Nora's feet hurt and her back hurt, and her mother had called twice to say she was fine, which was the exact thing her mother always said when she was not entirely fine. Owen came in alone. Nora saw him before she processed what she was seeing, the boy in his school uniform backpack on standing just inside the door, and then she processed it and was at his side in 4 steps. "Owen, hey, are you okay?" He looked up at her with those serious dark eyes, and his lower lip was doing something very controlled and deliberate, the expression of a child who had decided not to cry and was winning by a margin. My dad was supposed to pick me up, Owen said. From after school. He didn't come. I took the bus to the diner because it's the only address I remembered. Nora crouched down to his level. Okay, that was very smart. Do you know your dad's phone number? He didn't answer. Can you write it down for me? I'll try from the diner phone. She got Owen into a booth with a hot chocolate and a slice of apple pie. No soggy crust as promised, and called the number Owen had written in his careful block letters, and it went to voicemail. She left a message calm and factual. Then she sat with Owen and let him tell her about his day, which had included a disagreement with a classmate about whether sharks could survive in rivers which Owen had won. He informed her because he had looked it up. Bull sharks can, she said. Owen looked at her. That's what I said. Then you were right. Owen considered this. My dad says you should always check your facts before you argue, but you should also argue when you know you're right. Your dad's not wrong about that, she said. Caleb arrived 47 minutes later, pale and moving quickly, and when he saw Owen in the booth eating pie, he stopped in the middle of the diner floor as if he'd walked into something invisible. The relief on his face was so total and unguarded that it almost hurt to look at. He crossed to the booth, sat down across from Owen, and put both hands flat on the table like he needed to feel something solid. I'm sorry, he said. My meeting ran long and my phone died and I didn't. He stopped. He looked at Owen. I'm sorry, buddy. I should have been there. I know, Owen said with the equanimity of a child who had already processed this and moved on. Nora took care of me. We talked about sharks. Caleb looked up at her. She was standing at the end of the booth, and whatever he was feeling in that moment was right there on his face, not contained at all, just fully present. I hope it wasn't too much trouble, he said. He sat still and ate pie, she said. Best table I've had all week. Owen looked pleased. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, and something in his expression shifted from relief into something longer and quieter and harder to name. Thank you, he said finally. Nora. It was the first time he'd said her name. She didn't know why that registered the way it did, as something warm landing in her chest, settling there like it meant to stay. Any time, Chis, she said, because she meant it. She went back to her other tables. Behind her, she heard Owen tell his father that the crust on the pie was not soggy as he had been promised. She was still smiling about that 15 minutes later when Sandra came up behind her and said very quietly, That man is in love with you. Nora didn't turn around. Sandra? I've been watching people sit in booths for 40 years, honey. I know what I'm looking at. He's a customer. He's a very specific customer, Sandra said, who just drove 40 miles in a panic because his boy was here with you instead of somewhere else. She paused. Just think about it. That's all I'm saying. Nora said nothing. She picked up a coffee pot and went to refill booth 3. But she thought about it. She thought about it a lot. And something in her, something that had been very carefully still for a very long time, started to move. The thing about holding something at arm's length, Nora was learning, was that your arms could only stay extended for so long before the muscles gave. She started noticing things she hadn't let herself notice before. The way Caleb always left a generous tip, but never made it conspicuous, folded under the edge of the cup, rather than splayed out on the table as if he didn't want her to feel indebted. The way he thanked her every time, not perfunctorily, but with a specificity that meant he'd actually registered what she'd done, not just thanks, but thank you for remembering about the no onions. I didn't even realize I'd said it. The way she noticed one Thursday evening that he watched the room when she was working the far tables, his gaze tracking her across the diner with a patience that wasn't quite surveillance and wasn't quite longing and was something in between. Owen came in every Wednesday now, the standing date apparently established without anyone having to say so. He had progressed through most of the pie menu, apple, cherry, blueberry, a brief experimental phase with the key lime that had ended in a formal statement that lime is a condiment, not a dessert filling, and had opinions about every item. He had also, in that particular way of children who trust someone, started telling Nora things. Not big things at first. The name of his teacher, who was called Miss Hamada and was strict but fair. The fact that his best friend at school was named Priya and could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, a skill Owen was working on but had not yet mastered. The information that their apartment in New York had 17 floors below them, and that sometimes if you pressed your face to the window at night, the city looked like it was on fire in a good way. Then one Wednesday in late October, Owen looked up from his grilled cheese and said without preamble, "My mom used to cut it diagonally, too." Nora set down the coffee pot very gently. "Did she?" she said. "She said the same thing about the corners." Owen looked at the sandwich. "She said the best parts are the ones people think are small." The diner was quiet. Outside, a car went past on the wet street. "That sounds like something worth remembering," Nora said. Owen nodded. "I try to." He picked up a triangle of grilled cheese. "My dad doesn't talk about her very much. I think it makes him sad. But I like talking about her. Is that okay?" Nora sat down in the seat across from him, which she never did, but something told her this was a moment that required the same level. "I think that's very okay," she said. "I think the people we love are supposed to be talked about." Owen ate his sandwich in thoughtful silence for a moment. "Nora," he said finally. "Yeah. If somebody missed someone a lot, is it bad that they might also like someone new?" She looked at him steadily. He was 6 years old, almost 7, and he was asking her the thing that his father was apparently not able to ask himself, the way children sometimes carry the questions that the adults around them can't set down. "No," she said. "I don't think that's bad at all. I think that's just what it means to be alive. The heart doesn't get smaller every time it makes room." Owen considered this. "That's a good way to say it," he said. "I'm going to remember that." She got back up and went to collect the coffee pot. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. The offer came on the first Friday in November. Caleb had come in at his usual time late afternoon after the lunch rush and before the early dinner crowd, which meant the diner was quiet and they'd had more time to talk than usual. He'd asked her about the hospitality management degree. She'd mentioned it in passing weeks ago, and he'd remembered which by now she knew she should expect, and was still surprised by, and she'd told him about the program, the courses she'd taken, the job she'd had at a hotel in Pittsburgh that turned out to be run by someone who treated the staff like furniture. "What kind of management work were you doing?" he asked. "Events mostly, guest experience, some operational stuff, staffing, vendor relations. I was good at it," she said, "and it wasn't boasting, just fact. Better than the job let me be." He nodded slowly. He had the paper coffee cup in both hands, and he was looking at her in that way he had not through her, not past her, directly at her, as if she were the only person in the room, which technically she nearly was. "I have a position opening up," he said, "operations manager for a development project in the area. It's not a New York role, it's local. The work is real and the pay is fair, and I think you could do it better than anyone else I could hire." The silence that followed felt loaded. "Caleb," she said. "I know how it sounds," he said before she could continue. "And I want to be clear about what this is. It's a job offer. Professional, documented, with a real salary and a real job description that has nothing to do with the fact that I've been sitting in your section for 2 months. He paused. "But I'd be lying if I said there was no connection. I've watched you manage this room every time I come in. I've watched how you handle people, how you read situations, how you solve problems before they become problems. You're wasted here, Nora, not because this place isn't worth your time, but because you have more than this place needs." She set the coffee pot down on the nearest empty table because she suddenly needed both hands free. "I can't take a job from someone She stopped. "From someone you what?" he asked, and his voice was very quiet. She didn't answer that. She said instead, "People will say things." "They will," he agreed. "They're probably already saying things. And you don't care about that." "I care about what's true," he said. "The job is real. Your qualifications are real. What anyone else decides to make of it is their business, not mine." She looked at him for a long moment. The diner ticked around them, the refrigerator hummed, the distant clatter of Sandra loading the dishwasher, the muffled sound of traffic outside. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need." She picked up the coffee pot and went to check on the one other occupied table. When she came back, he was putting on his coat, and he left a tip that was as always folded under the edge of the cup, and he nodded to her as he passed. She stood at the window afterward and watched his car pull out of the parking lot and turn onto the street. The rain had started again. She hadn't even noticed when. She thought about her degree sitting in a drawer somewhere. She thought about the hotel job and the way she'd left it, not because she'd failed, but because she'd gotten tired of being good at something in service of someone who didn't deserve it. She thought about her mother, who always said Nora had too much ability to spend it on something too small. She thought about Owen and his careful opinions, and the thing he'd said about the heart not getting smaller. She didn't know what to do. But something in her had shifted some center of gravity she'd held very still for 4 years, and she could feel it wanting to move. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "I got offered a job today," she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is this the job you want or the job you're afraid to take?" Nora leaned against the window. Outside, Millbrook was doing what it always did in the rain, going quiet, going still drawing in around itself. "I don't know yet," she said. "When you know," her mother said, "you'll know." After she hung up, Nora stood there for a while longer watching the rain and thinking about gravity and distance and the weight of things you set down and can't always pick back up. She had no idea standing in that window that the hardest part wasn't going to be deciding whether to take the job. The hardest part was still coming. She didn't sleep well that night. She lay in her childhood bedroom, the one she'd moved back into when she returned to Millbrook, which she'd tried to make feel like a choice and had mostly succeeded, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about the things that had accumulated without her noticing over the past 2 months. The way her feet no longer ached on the nights Caleb came in. The way she'd started putting on a second coat of mascara on the days she knew he'd likely appear, then feeling annoyed at herself for it, then doing it anyway. The way Owen's Wednesday visits had become something she looked forward to with a warmth that surprised her. She thought about what Sandra had said. She thought about the job offer and the way Caleb had made it carefully, deliberately with all his cards on the table, which was, she was realizing very much how he operated. He didn't maneuver. He didn't imply. He said what he meant and let you decide what to do with it, which was either the most honest thing she'd ever encountered in a person or the most effective strategy for someone who knew that straightforwardness disarmed people more efficiently than cleverness. She didn't know which it was. She suspected it was both, and that in his case those weren't mutually exclusive. Around 2 in the morning, her mother knocked softly and pushed the door open. She was in her bathrobe, the one with the faded yellow flowers, her hair in the braid she wore to sleep. "You're thinking too loud again," her mother said. It was something she'd said since Nora was a teenager. "Sorry." Her mother came in and sat on the edge of the bed the way she used to when Nora was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "Tell me about this man." "Mom, not as a romantic prospect, just as a person. What is he like?" Nora looked at the ceiling. "Careful," she said. "Not cold, but careful. He thinks before he says things. He's good with Owen, really good, the kind of good that isn't performed." "What's Owen like?" "Serious, smart, has very strong opinions about food. She paused. "He told me that his mom cut sandwiches diagonally, too." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "And you're afraid," she said. "Of what?" "That's what I'm asking you." Nora thought about it. The real answer, the one under the practical concerns about optics and professional entanglement and what people would say. "That it's real," she said finally. "That it's not a misread. That it's actually what it looks like, and that if I act on it, I'm doing something I can't undo. And undoing it would mean losing something I didn't expect to want." Her mother was quiet for a long time. "Baby," she said at last, "that's not a reason to be careful. That's the reason." Nora turned her head to look at her. "The things worth losing sleep over," her mother said, "are the things worth something. You've been careful for 4 years. I've watched you be careful, and you're good at it, you are. But careful isn't the same as happy." After her mother left, Nora lay in the dark and thought about the word happy. It was such a simple word. She'd stopped using it as a standard a long time ago. It seemed too blunt, too absolute, like saying you wanted the sky to always be blue. She'd used words like stable, manageable, okay? She'd settled into okay the way you settle into a chair that isn't quite the right size. You stop noticing the discomfort because it becomes the baseline. She fell asleep sometime after 3, and she dreamed about the rain in the park across the street, in a booth by a window, and in the dream, someone was handing her a cup of coffee, and she reached for it, and the warmth of it was so unexpected and so specific that she woke up with her heart already beating faster. She lay there in the early gray light listening to the house around her, and she thought, okay. Okay was not enough anymore. She turned the job offer down on a Monday. She'd thought it through carefully over the weekend, made a list the way she always did when she didn't trust her own instincts, which was really just a way of putting her instincts into language so she could argue with them, and she'd arrived at what felt like a clear-eyed conclusion. She called the number on the business card he'd left and reached an assistant, left a message thanking him for the offer, and declining kept her voice even and professional and definitive. She felt walking back into the diner on Tuesday morning like someone who had made a sensible decision. She did not feel good about it. Brianna, who had apparently developed a facility for reading Nora's face that Nora found both impressive and inconvenient, looked at her once and said, "You said no to the job." Yes. Was that the smart decision or the scared decision? It was the appropriate decision. Brianna considered this. Appropriate is the word people use when they mean, I'm going to be annoyed about this for a long time. I'm not going to be annoyed about it. You're already annoyed about it, Brianna said, with the devastating accuracy of the young, and went to take a table's order. Nora refilled the napkin holders and thought about appropriate and annoyed, and the difference between them, and did not reach a satisfying conclusion. He came in on Thursday, as he always did. She was ready for it to be different, the particular awkwardness of having declined someone's generosity, the necessary recalibration of a dynamic that had been up to this point easy. She'd rehearsed a version of the interaction in her head, the polite distance, the professional warmth that said, "We understand each other, and this is fine." What actually happened was that he sat down and she brought his coffee, and he said, "Thank you for calling, I understand." That was it. No recrimination, no effort to relitigate. He picked up the menu not because he needed it. She'd long ago concluded he had it memorized and looked at it and said, "What's the soup today?" "Roasted butternut squash," she said. "I'll take a bowl." "Coming up." She went to put in the order and stood at the counter for a moment and felt something that she identified after brief internal examination as profound relief. He wasn't going to make it strange. He was going to let her keep what they had without forcing it into a shape it wasn't ready for. It should have been straightforwardly comforting. It was comforting, and it also made her like him more, which complicated everything. The rest of the shift proceeded normally. He ate, he read, he said something on his way out about the soup being the best thing he'd eaten all week, which she thought was probably an exaggeration, but was delivered with enough sincerity that she found herself believing it. Wednesday, Owen came in. He reported that he'd gotten the Rubik's Cube down to 90 seconds, which was not as fast as Priya, but was he judged an acceptable improvement. He ate his grilled cheese. He told Nora that his dad had been in a better mood this week, which Owen delivered as simple information, but which landed for Nora as something more layered. "I'm glad to hear it," she said. Owen looked at her steadily. "He smiles more when he's going to come here," Owen said. "I just wanted you to know." She didn't have anything to say to that. Owen picked up his apple juice with the air of someone who had delivered his point and was now ready to change the subject. Diane Pruitt had worked at Millbrook Diner for 7 years, which was long enough to have opinions about everything and the standing to share them freely. She was 51, divorced with grown kids, and a general outlook on the world that could best be described as productively skeptical. Nora liked her straightforwardness and her work ethic, and the fact that she never called in sick unless she actually was, but she had her own read on the situation developing in Booth 6, and she shared it with Sandra over the prep counter one Thursday morning, not knowing that Nora was within earshot in the back. "It's not going to end well," Diane said. "I've seen this before. Rich man, small-town girl, he thinks he likes simple things until he goes back to his world and realizes he doesn't." Sandra made a non-committal sound. "I'm not saying she's not a good person," Diane continued. "I'm saying that kind of gap money background lifestyle, it catches up with people. And she's the one who'll be left holding it." Sandra said carefully, "Caleb Weston seems like a decent man." "They all seem that way," Diane said, "until circumstances change." Nora in the back finished rolling the silverware she'd been working on and walked out without saying anything. Her face was composed. She put the silverware on the wait station and picked up her order pad. But something had shifted. Not in her conviction she'd heard versions of this before, had said versions of it to herself in the privacy of her own head, where she was always her own most critical audience. What shifted was the feeling of it. When she said it to herself, it was protective. When she heard it from someone else, it felt different. It felt like a box someone was trying to put her in. She thought, I am not a cautionary tale. I am a person making my own choices. Then she thought, but what choices exactly am I making? That evening after her shift, she sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time without starting it. The streetlights had come on. 2 dogs were being walked by a woman she recognized from the pharmacy. The diner windows glowed warm amber against the dark. She thought about Diane's words, and she thought about her mother's words, and she thought about Owen saying his father smiled more on the days he was going to come here. She thought, I am afraid. I have been afraid for a long time. The fear has started to look like wisdom, and I need to be honest with myself about which one it actually is. She started the car and drove home. The misunderstanding happened on a Friday. It began with Sharon Marsh, who ran the local newspaper, a thin weekly that had survived digitization by becoming mostly a social registry of who was doing what in Millbrook and the surrounding towns, and who had seen Caleb coming and going from the diner for weeks and had evidently done some research. The piece she ran was not hostile. That was the thing. It was presented as a kind of human interest item, warm in tone, speculative in content, with the headline, Pittsburgh exec finds a favorite spot in Millbrook, and a paragraph that described in soft and suggestive terms a charming regular interaction between the businessman and a longtime local waitress. The phrase, waited upon by Nora Callahan, appeared in the 3rd paragraph. Nora read it on her phone on her break, sitting on the back step of the diner in the cold, and felt something hot and corrosive move through her chest. It wasn't the mention of her name. It was the framing. The careful, sweet-toned framing that positioned her as a backdrop, as set decoration in a story about a rich man finding something quaint and charming in a small town. As if she were the local color and he were the protagonist. She went back inside and got through the rest of the shift by concentrating very carefully on her tables and not thinking about it. She thought about it. Caleb came in the following Tuesday earlier than usual, which she took as a sign that he'd seen the piece or been told about it. He sat down and she brought coffee without being asked, and he said, I saw the article. So did everyone? She said. Her voice was level. I didn't speak to anyone at the paper. I want you to know that. I believe you. He looked at her. You're angry. She paused, set down the coffee pot. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the way it was written, the way it described. She stopped again. I'm not a local attraction, Caleb. I'm a person. I know that, he said, and his voice was very steady. That's exactly what I know. The article made it sound like she caught herself, looked away, out the window where the gray November street was doing its ordinary thing. It made it sound like I'm the picturesque backdrop to your story, the interesting thing you found in a small town. That is not how I see you. I know it isn't. And she did know that it wasn't a question of him. It was a question of how the world arranged the story when it was told by other people. How quickly the narrative formed around the shape it already expected to see. I know it isn't, she said again. I needed to say it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what would you want the story to actually say? That's not the point. No, he said. I know, but I'm asking anyway. She looked at him. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded. He didn't push. He drank his coffee and ate his soup and left his usual tip, and Nora went about her shift, and nothing externally had changed, but something internally some pressure had been released by the saying of it, by the fact that he'd asked and then listened without defending himself or filling the silence with reassurance. He just let her say what she needed to say. And then asked what she wanted. Not assumed, asked. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. Check. The gossip in Millbrook had now reached a pitch that Nora found both exhausting and, when she was honest with herself, slightly clarifying. The versions varied. In Diane's version, Nora was setting herself up for heartbreak at best, and a significant loss of dignity at worst. In the version circulating among the women in her mother's book club, Nora was the unwitting subject of a rich man's passing fascination. In Brianna's version, which she shared only with Nora, and which Nora was fairly sure was the most accurate, everyone else was projecting their own fears and biases onto a situation they didn't understand and weren't inside. "The thing that bothers me," Brianna said one afternoon during a slow hour when they were doing side work together, "is that no one is asking what you want. Everyone's very busy deciding what's going to happen to you, like you're not a person who makes choices." "You sound like my mother," Nora said. "Your mother is a smart woman." "She is." "So, what do you want?" Nora folded a napkin with more precision than it required. "I want to not be the person in the newspaper paragraph who gets described as a backdrop." "Okay, what else?" Nora was quiet for a moment. "I want things to stay the way they are," she said, "and I want them to change, and I'm aware that's contradictory." Brianna shrugged. "Most true things are." Owen came in that Wednesday with a drawing he'd done in school. It was a picture of the diner, recognizable primarily because of the sign and the shape of the booths with two figures inside. One was small, with dark hair, and oversized hands, which was Owen. The other was taller, with brown hair and an apron, which was meant to be Nora. In the drawing, they were both eating pie. "I made this for you," Owen said. "You can put it up if you want." Nora looked at the drawing for a long moment. She thought about what it meant to be included in a child's picture of a place that mattered. She thought about what it meant that he'd put them both eating pie together, as if they were the same kind of person at the same kind of table. "I would love to put this up," she said. "Can you sign it?" Owen took the drawing back with great seriousness, found a pen from the cup on the counter, and signed it in the bottom corner. Owen W. AG 7. She put it up in the back near the coffee station where she could see it. That evening, Caleb came in for an unusual evening visit. He'd called ahead, which he'd never done before, to ask what time she worked until. She told him 9. He arrived at 8:45 after the last customers had left, and Sandra was cashing out the register. He stood at the door, and she went to let him in, and he said, "I'm not here as a customer. Can we talk?" Sandra at the register did not look up, but her shoulders had a quality about them that suggested she was listening intently. "Give me 5 minutes," Nora said. She finished her closing tasks, got her coat, and met him outside. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the diner under the light, with Millbrook quiet around them. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want to tell it to you directly, not in a diner booth where I'm a customer and you have other tables, because I don't think that's the right context for it." She waited. "I'm not trying to offer you anything," he said. "Not a job, not a solution, not a narrative. I'm not doing any of that." He paused. "What I want to say is simpler. It's just that I have not talked to someone the way I talked to you in a very long time, since before Claire died. And I know the timing is strange, and I know our circumstances are different, and I know you have your own things, your own life, your own questions, your own choices to make that have nothing to do with me. I know all of that." He looked at her. "And I still want to say it, because I think you deserve to hear it, and because I'm tired of not saying it." The street was very quiet. "What are you saying exactly?" she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "I'm saying I care about you," he said. "Not as a subject of interest or a local discovery or a backdrop in anyone's story. I care about who you are and how you think and the way you treated my son when he showed up here alone and scared, and the way you talked to him about his mother without making him feel strange about it." He stopped. "I'm not asking you to do anything with that. I'm just telling you the truth." Nora looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Diane's caution and her mother's wisdom and Brianna's question and the article in the paper and Owen's drawing with them eating pie at the same table. She thought about 4 years of appropriate and careful and okay. "I hear you," she said. Her voice was quiet, not closed open the way a door is open when someone has finally turned the handle. He nodded. They stood there in the cold for a moment longer, and Nora looked up at the sky, which was clear in the way November sometimes managed. All the clouds pushed away to reveal something dark and clean and full of stars. "I don't know what I want yet," she said. I mean that honestly, I'm not saying it to push you away. I'm saying I haven't let myself think about wanting things for a while, and it's going to take me some time to do it properly. I'm not in a hurry, he said. You should know it, she said, that the last time I trusted something that felt this real, I got it very wrong. I know it, he said. I've gotten things wrong too. Then we're both careful people, she said. We are. That's either a good foundation or a reason to worry. The corner of his mouth moved. I think it's both, he said. She almost smiled. She could feel it at the edges of her mouth, the particular warmth of it, the thing she hadn't quite allowed herself in a long time. Same time Thursday, she said. Same time Thursday, he said. She went inside. He waited until she was through the door and then walked to his car. Sandra, who was pulling on her coat at the register, looked at Nora over the rims of her reading glasses. Don't say it, Nora said. I wasn't going to say anything, Sandra said with the expression of someone who has many, many things to say. Nora hung up her apron and got her bag, and for the first time in 4 years the drive home felt shorter than it was. But December arrived the way it always did in Millbrook all at once, as if autumn had been slowly holding its breath and finally let go. The hardware store put up its window display of lights. The elementary school went up with a paper snowflake chain that stretched the entire length of the building. The diner started serving the peppermint hot chocolate that Sandra only made 1 month a year and which people drove from 3 towns over to get, which was one of those diner facts that seemed disproportionate until you tasted it. Nora and Caleb had found a rhythm. It wasn't a romance, technically, she hadn't agreed to that, and he hadn't asked for it, and she was learning to trust the pace of things that weren't pushed into a shape before they were ready. But it was something. They talked at his regular table more than they'd ever talked before, conversations that ran past the point where she needed to check on other tables' conversations she found herself returning to. Later in her head, turning over the interesting parts, the way you turn a smooth stone in your pocket. He told her about the early years of the company, the mistakes he'd made that he was willing to admit to the ones he still couldn't fully explain. She told him about the hotel job and the decision to come back and the way she'd been reframing it, not as a failure, but as an incomplete chapter that hadn't found its ending yet. Owen, for his part, had graduated from drawing a picture to actually doing his homework at the diner on Wednesday afternoons, spreading his papers across the booth with a proprietary air that delighted Nora and seemed to delight Caleb even more. He asked Nora for help with a reading comprehension assignment one Wednesday, and she sat with him for 20 minutes going through the passage, and afterward, Owen said with his characteristic deliberateness, "You explain things the right way." "What's the right way?" she asked. "Like you think I can understand, so I do." She thought about that for a long time. She also thought about Caleb watching them from across the table, quiet, with an expression she was finally letting herself read accurately. Not just relief, not just gratitude, but something warmer and more specific. The look of a man watching 2 people he loves doing something ordinary together. The look of someone understanding what a family feels like. The second complication came from a direction she hadn't expected. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was Caleb's business partner. They'd co-founded Weston Capital together in the early years, though Caleb had long since bought out his share, and Marcus now ran his own separate operation in New York. He arrived in Millbrook on a Friday without announcement, appeared at the diner, and introduced himself to Nora with the particular smoothness of someone who'd done their research. "I've heard quite a bit about you," he said, shaking her hand. He had the kind of easy charm that came from practice rather than nature, well-calibrated landing just right. "I hope it was complimentary," she said. "All of it." He settled into the booth. "Caleb speaks well of people he respects, and he talks about you like you've solved a problem he didn't know he had." She wasn't sure how to take that. She brought coffee and went to put in his order. Sandra, appearing at her shoulder, immediately said quietly, "I know that face. That's the face of someone deciding how much to trust the new person." "He's Caleb's former partner," Nora said. "I know," he called ahead. Sandra paused. "Be careful with that one. He's charming in a way that means he needs something." Nora went back to the table. Marcus, she found over the course of the next hour, was interesting and funny and easy to talk to, and also Sandra was not wrong operating with an agenda he was choosing not to disclose. It came out toward the end of his meal, almost as an aside. Caleb is thinking about expanding the local project. Significant capital commitment. It would keep him in this area much more consistently. He paused, stirring his coffee. That's good news, presumably, for everyone who likes having him around. She looked at him steadily. I get the sense you're trying to tell me something. He smiled the kind of smile that acknowledged you'd seen through him and wasn't troubled by it. Caleb is one of the best people I've ever known, he said, dropping the smoothness. Just saying it. And he's been a different kind of person since he started coming here. Lighter, less... He paused. Less like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. He looked at her. I wanted to see what kind of woman does that to a man like him. And I think I understand, he said simply. After Marcus left, Nora stood at the window for a moment. Outside, a light snow had started the first of the season, thin and tentative, settling on the park across the street in a way that made the familiar landscape look briefly unfamiliar. She thought about what Marcus had said. Lighter, less like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. She knew what that felt like. She'd been the person waiting for the other shoe for 4 years. What she hadn't quite admitted until this moment was that something had changed. She was still careful. She was still watchful. But the quality of her watchfulness had shifted from vigilance against disaster to something more like attentiveness toward possibility. She put on her coat at the end of her shift and walked out into the snow. Caleb was sitting on the bench in front of the diner. He'd been waiting, she realized, not lurking just there with his coat collar turned up against the cold sitting in the falling snow, with the patience of a man who had nowhere more important to be. You waited? She said. It's snowing, he said. I wanted to see it with you. It was such a simple thing to say. She stood there for a moment, feeling the snow land on her eyelashes and the bridge of her nose, and looked at this man who drove 40 miles for soup and waited in the cold to watch the first snow of the year with her, and something in her chest that had been locked for a long time turned over. She sat down on the bench beside him. They didn't say anything for a while. The snow came down steadily and the park across the street disappeared into white, and Millbrook went quiet in the way it only did when snow fell, like the town was listening for something. I'm scared, she said finally. It was the most honest thing she'd said to him. Me too, he said. She looked at him. Of what? Of wanting this badly, he said. Of getting it right. He stopped. Started again. After Claire died, I stopped planning for things. Not because I was giving up, because every time I looked ahead, the picture was empty, and I didn't know how to put anything in it. And then I started coming here, and without meaning to, the picture started filling in again. He looked at the snow. That's terrifying in the best possible way. Terrifying in the best possible way, she repeated. You've heard worse descriptions, he said. I've heard much worse, she said, and she meant it as something more than a conversational return. He looked at her. She looked at him. The snow came down. She didn't take his hand. She wasn't ready for that, not quite. But she shifted on the bench so that their shoulders were almost touching, and he understood what that meant, and he didn't move away. They sat in the snow for another half hour, until the cold became something she couldn't ignore. And then she said she needed to get home to her mother. And he walked her to her car, and they said goodnight, like two careful, scared, half-open people who were figuring out the map of something new. She drove home with the heater on and the snow falling beyond the windshield, and the feeling clear and strange and insistent that the holding pattern was over. She was ready to land somewhere. She just hadn't decided yet where. She found herself thinking about the job offer again. Not because she was regretting the refusal she'd made her decision, and she stood by it, understood why she'd made it, but because the parameters of it had changed in her mind. When she'd said no, the first time, the offer had felt entangled with everything else, too. Loaded, too easy to misinterpret, too close to the shape of a story she didn't want to be in. A woman takes a job from a rich man she's developing feelings for, and what does that look like from the outside? What does it look like from the inside when the day comes and she needs to disagree with him on something professional, and every disagreement will be shadowed by everything else? But the thought that kept returning wasn't about the job he'd offered. It was about the work itself, the events management, the operational logistics, the skills. She'd been letting atrophy in a diner for 4 years, not because she didn't value them, but because she'd had nowhere to put them. She'd started doing something she hadn't done since she left Pittsburgh. She'd started taking notes. Not on anything specific, just observations the way the diner could optimize its Thursday slow period, the event potential of the back room. Sandra never used the referral structure for local weddings that everyone knew went to a catering company 2 towns over when it could just as easily come here. She wrote them in the notebook she kept in her bag, the one she'd originally bought for her mother's medical appointments, and then repurposed because she needed somewhere to put her thoughts. Sandra found her writing in it one afternoon and said, "What's that? Ideas," Nora said. Sandra read over her shoulder for a moment. "These are good ideas. I know. You should do something with them." "I'm working on it." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "There's an event coordinator job at the Harwick Hotel in town. They posted it last week." Nora looked up. "I'm just saying," Sandra said with careful neutrality. "You're saying a lot," Nora said. "I'm saying nothing," Sandra said, moving away. "I'm saying nothing at all." Nora looked back at her notebook. Then at the diner, the familiar booths and the coffee station, and the window where she could see the park, and the bench where she and Caleb had sat in the snow last week. She felt something clarifying. A separation between two different things she'd been treating as one, her feelings for Caleb and what she wanted her life to be. They were related, but they weren't the same. What she wanted her life to be was something she owed herself regardless of who was or wasn't in it. She'd been waiting for permission. Not from him. Not from anyone specific, but from circumstance, from confidence, from the sense that she'd earned the right to want more. She already had the right. She'd had it the whole time. She took the notebook home that evening and filled 6 more pages. The afternoon Caleb told Owen about Nora changed something in the dynamic, though she didn't learn about it until later. She found out from Owen directly on a Wednesday when he arrived with a different quality about him, the contained but barely contained energy of a child carrying important information. He sat down, he ordered his grilled cheese, and then he looked at her with those dark, serious eyes and said, "My dad told me he likes you." Nora took a breath. "He did. He said it's the kind of liking where you want to be around someone because they make things feel better, not different, but better." Owen considered this. "I asked if that was like how I like Priya, and he said yes a little bit, but for grown-ups, it was more complicated." "Your dad is right," Nora said carefully. "It's more complicated for grown-ups." "Why?" "Because grown-ups have more things to lose," she said, "and more things to protect." Owen thought about this for a moment. But if both people want to be around each other, why is it complicated to... That's, Nora said, genuinely a great question. "I know," Owen said. She brought his grilled cheese when it was ready and set it down, and noticed that her hands were again not quite steady. Owen cut the sandwich with the careful, diagonal expertise he'd now fully internalized, and then looked up at her. "I told him he should tell you the complicated version," he said, "because you're not afraid of complicated things. You're just careful about them. There's a difference." 7 years old. She thought 7 years old, and this child has articulated the thing it took her 3 months to understand about herself. "Owen," she said, "yeah, you are a genuinely remarkable person." He looked pleased, but also a little shy about it. The way kids look when they've been told something that they believe is true, but haven't yet decided is okay to believe. "I just notice things," he said. "That's not a small skill," she said. "Don't underestimate it." He ate his grilled cheese. She went about her other tables. And somewhere between table 4 and table 7, she arrived at a decision she'd been circling for months, not about Caleb specifically, but about herself. She was going to apply for the Harwick Hotel job, not because of the money, not because of what anyone else thought, not because of Caleb or despite him, because she'd been holding a part of herself in abeyance for too long, and it was time to put it back in the world. She went home that night and wrote the application in one sitting, the way she'd always written her best work fast and without second-guessing, trusting the instincts that had been quietly sharpening for 4 years without anywhere to go. She submitted it at midnight, sat back and thought there. That's one choice made cleanly. The rest would come. She told Caleb about the application 2 days later over the phone he'd started calling in the evenings. Sometimes short conversations. Nothing dramatic. Just the checking in that happens when two people have agreed that checking in is now something they do. The Harwick Hotel, he said. That's a good property, new ownership, decent leadership. I know who the new owner is, she said. I did my research. He paused. She could hear something in the pause. You think it's connected to you? She said. Is it? The job posting is real, Nora. I had nothing to do with it. I know, she said. I verified. I'm not assuming you arranged it. She paused. But I needed to check. I'm glad you checked, he said. I want you to always check. I don't want you to take things on trust that should be verified. She was quiet for a moment, holding the phone, sitting on her bed in the dark. That's an unusual thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. I have resources and I have reach, and I know that can be complicated for someone who values independence. I don't want to be a complication in your life. I want to be something else. What do you want to be? A pause. Shorter than she expected. The person you tell things to, he said. That's it. That's the whole of it. She thought about the last person she'd told things to and how that had ended. She thought about the particular vulnerability of the statement he'd just made, its simplicity, its specific kind of exposure. You're getting better at saying things, she said. I have a 7-year-old consultant, he said. She laughed. It came out before she could manage it, surprised out of her real and warm. There it is, he said quietly, and she could hear that he was smiling. Don't make a thing of it, she said. I wouldn't dream of it. She went to sleep that night with the windows cracked and the cold coming in, and the particular feeling of someone who has been holding still for a long time and is finally gently beginning to move. The interview at the Harwick Hotel was scheduled for the following Monday. She pressed her best blazer the night before and stood in her mother's kitchen drinking tea, and her mother watched her with that expression that mixed pride and relief and the subtle sadness of a parent who has watched their child undervalue themselves for too long. You look like yourself, her mother said, the self I remember. I've been here the whole time, Nora said. I know, her mother said. But this part of you went somewhere quiet for a while. It's good to see it back. Nora drove to the interview. She walked in, sat down, and spent 45 minutes being exactly the person she'd spent the last 4 years becoming without giving herself credit for it. Not the waitress, not the small-town girl, not the woman in someone else's newspaper story. The events coordinator who had been quietly building toward this for years. The person who noticed things and solved problems and could read the emotional temperature of a room before anyone else knew there was a temperature to read. She left the interview with her hands in her pockets and the specific calm of someone who has done something exactly as well as they knew they could. She called her mother from the parking lot. How'd it go? Her mother said. I got it, Nora said. She knew. She didn't need the formal offer to know. I think I got it. Her mother was quiet for a moment, and then she made a sound that Nora recognized as the kind of sound you make when you've been holding your breath for someone for a very long time and they finally landed safely. Okay, her mother said softly. Okay, baby. There you go. Nora sat in the parking lot for a moment, feeling the weight of the thing she'd just done, not its heaviness, but its realness, the specific gravity of a choice made for herself and no one else. Then she drove to the diner, picked up her afternoon shift, and carried the quiet satisfaction of it through the rest of the day like something precious tucked inside a coat pocket. She didn't tell Caleb until that evening. When she did, he said nothing for a moment. Then, how do you feel? Like I remembered something I'd forgotten, she said. Good, yeah, he said. And the word was simple and whole and exactly enough. The Harwick Hotel offered her the job on a Wednesday. The call came at 9 in the morning, and Nora was in the back of the diner doing mise en place for the lunch rush, and she stepped outside into the cold December air to take it. And the events director said the words she'd known were coming and still felt as a physical sensation when they arrived a release, like something unclenching that had been tight for a very long time. She accepted. She gave Sandra 2 weeks' notice that afternoon, which Sandra received with a sigh and an embrace, and then immediately began complaining about the scheduling logistics as a way of not saying anything sentimental. You're irreplaceable, Sandra said, which was more than she usually said. No one's irreplaceable. Nora said, "but I appreciate it." "You're irreplaceable," Sandra said again firmly and walked away before Nora could disagree. Brianna hugged her for a long time and then stepped back and said, "Finally." "I've only been here 4 years," Nora said. "4 years is a long time to be somewhere you've already outgrown," Brianna said. "I say that with love and also with the specific feeling of someone who is terrified they're going to be here for their own 4 years without noticing." "You won't be," Nora said. "I'll make sure of it." Brianna looked at her. "How?" "I'll write you a reference so good, they'll have to invent a new job category to contain you," Nora said. She told Caleb that evening on their now regular phone call, and he was quiet for a moment before he said, "I want to take you to dinner." "You've been buying me dinner for months," she said. "In the diner. I want to take you to dinner. As a—" He paused, and she could hear him deciding how to say it. "As a date. A real one. If you want that." She sat with that for a moment. The word date floating in the air between them, substantial and nerve-inducing in equal measure. "Where did you have in mind?" she said. "Somewhere in Pittsburgh. Good food, low-key. No one from Millbrook." She understood what he was offering, a context where neither of them was a character in anyone else's story. A table for two where the only people deciding what this was were the two of them. "Friday, Truss," she said. "I work until 6. Give me time to change. I'll pick you up at 7. She hung up and sat on her bed for a moment, holding the phone, feeling something that she didn't immediately have a word for. Not quite excitement, not quite fear, something that contained both and was larger than either. She texted her mother, "He asked me to dinner." A real one. Her mother texted back almost immediately, "What are you going to wear?" She laughed. Botin. The dinner was at a restaurant in Pittsburgh that she'd never been to. Small, warm, with the kind of lighting that was doing intentional work, and the kind of menu that trusted you to know what you wanted without explaining itself at length. Caleb had a table near the back, which she suspected was chosen for exactly the reason she appreciated it. Faced the room rather than the door, which was the choice of someone who preferred to observe rather than be observed. She wore a dark green dress she'd bought 3 years ago and worn exactly once to a work thing at the hotel that had turned out to be nothing, and it had been hanging in her closet since then, as if it was waiting for a better occasion. This was a better occasion. He was already at the table when she arrived, and he stood up when he saw her, which was such a specific and old-fashioned thing to do that she found it disarming in exactly the way it was intended. "You look—" he started, and then he stopped and seemed to decide that whatever word he'd been reaching for wasn't adequate, and he just said, "Hi." "Hi," she said. She sat down. He sat down. A waiter appeared, and they ordered, and then they were alone with their drinks and the room around them, and the particular awareness of two people who have been circling something for months and are now finally undeniably in it. "This is different," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good different, I hope. Ask me at the end of the evening." He smiled a full smile, the one she didn't see often, the one that changed his whole face. She filed it away. She'd been filing things away about him for months without quite admitting she was doing it. They talked the way they always talked, but without the architecture of the diner around them, no other tables to check, no coffee to refill, no Sandra appearing at strategic moments with opinions she was pretending not to have. Just the two of them and the conversation and the gradual ease of people who have been learning each other carefully and are finally somewhere they can move freely. He told her about Owen's first year after Claire, the behavior the school had flagged the therapist they'd found who was good. The particular grief of a 6-year-old who kept asking when Mom was coming home and eventually one morning at breakfast stopped asking. That day was worse than all the others, he said. The day he stopped asking, because I knew he'd accepted it, and I wasn't sure whether that was healing or just— He paused. Just getting used to something he shouldn't have to be used to. "Both," she said. "I think it's always both." He looked at her. "You sound like you know what that's like." "Not in the same way," she said. "But I've watched my mother accept things she shouldn't have to accept, and I know that the acceptance and the grief coexist. They don't replace each other." He was quiet for a moment. "She raised a good daughter," he said. "She'd be the first to tell you that was largely accidental," Nora said, and he laughed. and she felt the sound of it land somewhere important. She told him over the second course about her father who had left when she was 10. Not dramatically, not in a single event, but in the manner of someone who had been slowly leaving for years and one day just didn't come back. She'd never talked about it easily. It was the kind of thing she had to choose to say, and choosing it had always felt like more than she wanted to give. But she chose it tonight, and it came out clean and whole and without the jagged edges she expected. "I'm sorry," he said when she'd finished. "I've made my peace with it," she said. "Mostly. The less mostly parts are the ones that make me careful." "I know something about that, Geese," he said. "I know you do," she said. They looked at each other across the table, and the specific understanding in that look, the recognition of two people who've both been undone by something and rebuilt themselves from a different kind of material, settled between them like something solid. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said after a pause. "You usually are," she said. "I'm about to be more so than usual." He set down his glass. "I came to Millbrook the first time for a business meeting. That part was true. But I came back the second time because I was driving home and I thought about you, about the conversation we'd had, about the way you'd talked to me." He looked at the table for a moment. "I'd been having a bad period, a longer bad period than I was letting on to anyone. And talking to you that first night was the first time in months I felt like a person having a conversation rather than a problem being managed." He looked up. "So I came back. And I kept coming back. And it was not subtle or particularly professional, and I'm sorry if it made things complicated for you." She held that for a moment. "It did make things complicated," she said. "I know. But complicated isn't the same as wrong." He looked at her. "I've thought about that first night too," she said. "The rain, the soup, the way you looked out the window. I remember thinking that you looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. And I remember being interested, which I talked myself out of because that's what I do. But it was there." The waiter appeared and they went through the automatic mechanics of dessert choices. And then the waiter was gone again, and they were back in it, the space between them charged with something that was no longer in question but wasn't yet spoken. "I should tell you, she said, "that I'm afraid of this." "I know," he said. "Not of you specifically," she said. "Of this. Of wanting something this specifically. Of what it costs if it goes wrong." "It's a rational thing to be afraid of," he said. "Yes," she said, "and I've spent 4 years listening to rational fear. And I'm starting to think rational fear sustained long enough stops being rational and starts being just habit, a way of staying still." He was listening with that particular attention of his fully in it, not constructing a response while she was talking, just receiving what she was saying. "So I'm saying I'm afraid," she said, "and I'm choosing this anyway, because I think you're worth it, and because I think I am too." Something in his face moved, not performed, not managed, just there. The face of a man who has been very careful for a very long time and has just been given permission to put something down. "I think you're worth everything," he said, simply, without drama. She looked at him across the white tablecloth in the warm light of the restaurant and thought, this is it. This is the landing. This is the place after the holding pattern. And it's nothing like I imagined. It's simpler and more solid, and it's enough. "Let's have dessert," she said. He smiled. "Yes," he said. "Let's." She gave her notice at the diner in the third week of December. Her last day scheduled for just after New Year's. Sandra had asked for the extra time. And Nora had agreed because she owed Sandra more than 2 weeks after 4 years. And also because she was not yet quite ready to stop being a waitress at Millbrook Diner, in the way that you're sometimes not quite ready to stop being a particular version of yourself, even when you know the new version is better. Word spread through Millbrook as word did. Most people were simply happy for her. Some were curious about the timing she was starting at the Harwick, 2 weeks after her last day at the diner, and everyone in town could do the math on who'd been in whose section for the past 4 months. Diane Pruitt, to her credit, found Nora during a slow Thursday afternoon and said without preamble, "I may have been wrong about the situation." Nora looked at her. "I said what I said because I was worried about you," Diane said. "I know it came across as something else, but I was looking at it from..." She paused. "From the outside." And the outside doesn't always tell you what's happening on the inside. No, Nora said. It doesn't. Diane nodded and went back to her tables. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something honest, and Nora filed it as such. She told her mother about the dinner, about the conversation, about the things she'd said, and the things he'd said, and her mother listened with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and her face doing the particular quiet thing it did when she was taking something in carefully. He sounds like someone who has grown into himself, her mother said when Nora was finished. That's exactly what he is, Nora said. So have you, her mother said. You just haven't been looking. On Christmas Eve, Owen called her. She was at home making her mother's traditional sweet potato casserole, and her phone lit up with a Pittsburgh number she'd added to her contacts, and she picked up expecting Caleb. Hi, Nora, said Owen. Owen? Hi. Everything okay? Yes. A pause. I wanted to tell you Happy Christmas Eve, because I know you have Christmas tradition with your mom, and I didn't want to interrupt Christmas Day. She set down the spoon. That is very thoughtful. I also wanted to ask, Owen continued, if you're coming to the New Year's dinner, my dad is making a reservation somewhere. He mentioned it, she said carefully. I told him you should come, Owen said, because it would be better with you, not worse. He paused in the manner of someone verifying a logical structure. Sometimes people say things would be better without explaining why they'd be worse without. I wanted to be specific. I appreciate the specificity, she said. So you'll come. I'll come, she said. Good. Another pause. Merry Christmas, Nora. Merry Christmas, Owen. She put the phone down and stood in her mother's kitchen smelling sweet potato and cinnamon and felt something she recognized after a moment as joy, the simple, undefended kind, the kind that just lands without asking permission. Her mother appeared in the doorway. Who was that Owen? Nora said. He called to wish me a Merry Christmas and formally invite me to New Year's dinner. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. That boy, she said softly, is something special. He really is, Nora said. Her mother came in and picked up the casserole dish, and they worked side by side in the warm kitchen, and Nora thought about the year ending and the year coming and the shape of the thing she was walking toward. Not a rescue, not a transformation, not a story. Someone else was writing about her. Just a life. Hers. Moving in the direction she'd chosen with the people she'd chosen on terms that were entirely her own. She thought that was enough. She thought that was more than enough. She thought it was everything. New Year's Eve arrived with the particular pressure of a night that had already been assigned too much meaning by the culture at large. She got ready in her mother's bathroom, borrowing her mother's good pearl earrings, and her mother stood in the doorway with the expression parents wear when their child is going somewhere they can't follow. You don't have to be anything tonight except yourself, her mother said. I know. I just like to say it. I know that too. She drove into Pittsburgh, which she had not done with any frequency since she'd moved back to Millbrook, and the city hit her the way it always did after an absence too fast, too bright, demanding something from you before you were ready to give it. She found the restaurant parked, checked her coat, and walked into a room where Caleb and Owen were already seated at a corner table that Owen had clearly chosen because it had a direct view of the kitchen pass-through, which he found interesting. Owen stood up when she arrived, mimicking something he'd clearly observed. Good evening, he said. Good evening, Owen, she said, and shook his hand solemnly because he had offered it. Caleb behind him was doing the thing where he was trying not to smile and not succeeding. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. They sat down, and the evening arranged itself around them, the food which Owen assessed with his usual rigor, the conversations that braided and separated and came back together, the wine she and Caleb shared, while Owen had a Shirley Temple with the gravity of someone sampling a fine vintage. At one point, Owen excused himself to use the restroom, and Caleb looked at her across the table and said, Thank you for coming. Where else would I be? She said. He looked at her. He paused. That's a nice thing to hear. It's a true thing, she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, just the weight of his hand on hers, warm and deliberate and real. She turned her hand over and let her fingers close around his, and they sat like that while the room moved around them, and it was such a small thing and such an enormous thing simultaneously that she had to look away for a moment out at the bright windows and the dark city beyond. Owen came back and regarded them with the equanimity of a child who had been quietly invested in this outcome and was choosing not to make a production of it. "The hand sanitizer in the bathroom is lavender," he said, sitting down. "I don't think that's the right scent for a restaurant." "Noted," Caleb said. "I'm just saying." "I'll pass it along to management," Nora said. Owen looked satisfied. He picked up his Shirley Temple. Across the table, Caleb's hand was still warm against hers. Opsit. January began. The Harwick Hotel was older than Nora had expected, not run down, but layered with the particular character of a building that had been someone's project for decades, and bore the marks of all the different visions that had been applied to it. The new ownership had invested in renovation, which meant about half the staff was legacy and half was new hire, which meant the internal culture was still finding itself two different sets of habits, trying to negotiate a shared language. Nora had been hired for exactly this moment, she realized quickly. Her job wasn't just events coordination. It was the subtler work of reading the temperature of a room and adjusting before anyone knew adjustment was needed. It was, in other words, the work she'd been doing at Millbrook Diner for 4 years, dressed up in professional language and applied at a different scale. She was very good at it. The events director, a woman named Patricia, who was exacting and fair in equal measure, told her after 2 weeks that she was the best hire they'd made in the renovation phase, which Nora received with the equanimity of someone who had known this was true, but had needed to hear it said aloud by someone with authority. She kept her Thursday evenings with Caleb, who had made a habit of driving out on those days, partly because the timing worked with his Pittsburgh schedule, and partly he'd admitted this over the phone with the directness she'd come to depend on, because Thursday evenings with Nora had become the thing he planned his week around. She had her own version of that feeling. She'd stopped arguing with it. Owen started calling her on Sundays, not always for any particular reason, sometimes to report on the Rubik's Cube progress, sometimes to share an observation about something that had happened during the week, sometimes just to talk in the way children talk when they've decided they trust someone and want them to stay trusted. She always answered. She always had time. Her mother, who had met Caleb twice now, the first time accidentally, when he'd stopped by the house to pick up a scarf Nora had left in his car, and the second time deliberately for dinner, which her mother had cooked with the kind of focused intensity she applied to significant occasions, had given her verdict simply, "He listens like he means it. That's rarer than it should be." "It is," Nora had agreed, "and he looks at you like you're the smartest person in the room." "I usually am," Nora said. Her mother had laughed, the real one, the one Nora had been trying to earn her whole life. "There's my girl," her mother said. The crisis came in February, 6 weeks into her new job on a Friday afternoon. A major corporate event she'd spent 3 weeks organizing 65 attendees, a keynote speaker, a catered dinner. The full scope of a professional conference fell apart when the AV company they'd contracted called at 4 p.m. on the day prior to say they were folding, no warning, no backup plan. Nora was alone in the event office when the call came. She sat with the phone for exactly 30 seconds, which was the amount of time she allowed herself for the initial shock. Then she opened her contacts. The next 4 hours were the kind of work she'd always been capable of and had never been given the scope to do. She called every AV vendor in a 60-mile radius found 1-2 towns over who had a cancellation that weekend and could pivot, negotiated a rate that was within the existing budget by a margin. So slim it was essentially art coordinated. The logistics. Briefed Patricia, updated the client, and had the entire problem solved before Patricia, who had gone to handle another issue, came back. Patricia stood in the doorway of the event office and looked at the revised logistics sheet on Nora's desk and said, "How?" "I've been managing emergencies in underfunded spaces for 4 years," Nora said. "This was actually better resourced than most of them." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "I need you to be here for a long time," she said. "I intend to be," Nora said. She called Caleb on her way home, still buzzing with the particular energy of a crisis well managed, and told him what had happened. He listened, and at the end he said, "I've seen people in my industry who'd have handed that to a deputy and gone home. You solved it yourself. I didn't have a deputy, she said. You wouldn't have handed it off even if you did, he said. She thought about that. No, she said. I wouldn't. That's the thing about you, he said. You don't need anyone to solve things for you. You just need someone to be interested in how you solved them. She pulled into her mother's driveway and sat in the car for a moment in the winter dark. That's exactly right, she said softly. That's exactly what I need. I know, he said. I've been paying attention. She sat there with the phone to her ear and the heat ticking off in the cooling engine and the feeling clear and quiet and steady of being completely known by someone and having them stay anyway. Caleb, she said. Yeah. Thank you for paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. Then, it's the easiest thing I've ever done, he said. She got out of the car and went inside, and her mother looked up from her book and said, Good day. Very good day, Nora said. And she meant it in every way there was to mean something. The thing about building something new was that the old structure didn't disappear. It was still there underneath, and occasionally you'd set a foot down expecting solid ground and find instead the hollow echo of a place that had been weight-bearing once and wasn't anymore. Nora felt that hollow echo on a Saturday in late February when she came home from a half-day at the Harwick and found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hands and an expression that had gone very careful. What is it? Nora said, coming out of her coat. Her mother set the letter on the table. It was from the specialist in Pittsburgh, the one they'd been seeing for the past year, for the condition that was chronic but manageable. Manageable in the terms the doctor used had a specific medical meaning, and what the letter described was an adjustment to that meaning. The condition was progressing, not alarmingly, the letter was careful to say, not into dangerous territory. But the management protocol needed to change, which meant more frequent appointments, an additional medication, and a modified daily routine that would require the letter use the word assistance, which was the medical word for what Nora understood as more of her. She read the letter twice. Her mother watched her. It's not as bad as it sounds, her mother said. I know, Nora said. I don't want you to, Mom. Her mother stopped. I'm not going anywhere, Nora said. I have a job that pays well. I have a schedule I can manage, and I've never been in a better position to handle this than I am right now. She folded the letter, put it on the table, looked at her mother. Okay. Her mother's eyes went bright in the way they did when she was working hard not to cry. Okay, she said softly. Nora made tea. She stood at the counter while it steeped and thought through the logistics, the appointment schedule, the medication costs, the hours she might need to adjust at the hotel. Patricia was reasonable. She'd already proven that. The job was flexible enough if she was transparent about the need. She thought about the version of herself a year ago who would have folded this crisis inward, managed it, alone told no one, and quietly redistributed the weight until she'd built a carrying structure that could hold it but couldn't hold anything else. Who would have called it strength? She picked up her phone and called Caleb. Not because she needed him to solve it. She was already solving it the way she always solved things, quickly, practically, without flinching. She called because he'd said that's what he wanted to be the person she told things to, and she believed him, and she was choosing to let him be that. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said. How was the half-day? Good, she said. And I have something to tell you about my mom, she told him. He listened without interrupting. At the end he said, What do you need? Not let me fix it. Not I can help with the cost. Not any of the things a man with his resources might reflexively offer. Just, what do you need? Nothing yet, she said. I just wanted to tell you. I'm glad you did, Uds, he said. I'm getting better at it, she said. The telling. You're good at it, he said. You've always been good at it. You just had to believe it was worth doing. She looked out the window at the February light on the backyard, gray and thin, but present, the particular light of a month that knows it's almost over. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. She hung up and finished making the tea and brought 2 cups to the kitchen table where her mother was waiting, and they sat together in the quiet and drank their tea, and outside the light got thinner, and then the day let go and evening came in from the east, and none of it was easy, but all of it was manageable, which Nora was beginning to understand was not a consolation prize, but a foundation. Bet. The Sharon Marsh article surfaced again in March. Not the original piece, but a follow-up that was considerably less charming. Someone had connected the dots between Caleb's name and the local hotel development project, and Sharon had done further research, and the new piece was less about a businessman finding a favorite diner and more about corporate investment patterns in the Millbrook area, which meant Nora's name now appeared in a different kind of context, adjacent to a story about money and influence and local development in a way that made her feel like a footnote in a business story rather than a backdrop in a romance, which was a lateral move at best. She read it in the parking lot of the Harwick on her break and felt the familiar hot corrosion moving through her chest. This time, though, she was faster to identify it. It was anger, yes, but underneath the anger was something she recognized. Now, having looked at it more carefully over the past few months, it was the fear of other people's narratives, the terror of being the supporting character in a story she didn't write, shaped into a role she hadn't chosen by people who didn't know her and weren't asking. She put her phone down, finished her coffee, and thought about what she actually knew to be true. She knew she'd gotten the hotel job on her own merits, having applied to a posting she'd found independently. She knew her work there was not contingent on anything or anyone outside of what she produced. She knew who she was not, who the newspaper said she was not, who the diner gossip said she was not, who anyone's imagination of the situation said she was. She knew. That was enough. It had to be enough because you couldn't control other people's stories. You could only be so certain of your own that theirs lost the power to revise it. She went back inside and ran the setup for a corporate luncheon that had 17 specific dietary requirements and went off without a single complaint. And at the end of the day, Patricia told her the client had called to say it was the best event they'd hosted in 2 years. She drove home in the early spring dark, and when her phone lit up with Caleb's name, she answered and said, "I saw the article." "So did I," he said. "How are you?" "I'm fine," she said. "I mean it, I'm fine." I was angry for about 20 minutes, and then I thought about what I actually know to be true. "And what do you know to be true?" "That I earned my job," she said. "That I know who I am, and that Sharon Marsh is going to write whatever she's going to write, and it doesn't have anything to do with me." A pause. "You have gotten better at this," he said. "I had a slow start," she said. "I'm making up for lost time." She got home and told her mother about the article, and her mother said the same thing she'd said about the first one, which was, people write stories to explain things they don't understand. The explanation says more about the writer than the subject. "You've always known that," Nora said. "It took me 50 years to learn it," her mother said. "You're ahead of schedule." March tipped into April. The trees along the park across from the diner, which Nora still passed on her way into work, because the Harwick was in the same direction, and she'd kept the route, began showing the first tentative green, the specific pale optimism of early spring in a northern climate. She and Caleb had found their shape. It wasn't formal, wasn't announced, wasn't the kind of thing that came with a conversation where two people looked at each other and said, "This is what we are now." It was more like a river finding its course, gradual, shaped by the available ground, arriving at its destination through the accumulated direction of 100 small choices. Thursday evenings. Sunday calls with Owen. The occasional Pittsburgh dinner. A Saturday afternoon at a museum in the city. Owen marching through the dinosaur exhibit with the focused intensity of a researcher. Caleb and Nora walking behind him and talking in the way you talk when you're not performing talking for anyone. She didn't stop being careful. She didn't think she ever would, and she'd stopped apologizing for it in her own head. Careful was not the same as closed. She was careful, and she was open, and she was learning that those things could coexist. She had dinner with Caleb's sister one evening, Elaine, who was warm and direct and looked at Nora the way you look at someone you've heard a lot about and are relieved to find the reports are accurate. They talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Caleb or Owen, and at the end Elaine said, "He's different with you, more settled." "Different how?" Nora said. "Like he knows where he is," Elaine said. "He spent 2 years not knowing where he was, geographically, emotionally, all of it, and now he knows." She looked at Nora. "That's you." I don't say it to put pressure on you. I say it because you should know. Nora drove home from that dinner and sat in the car for a long moment in the spring dark. The trees were fully leafed now. The park across from the diner was green and lit from below, and someone had put flowers in the gazebo ahead of some weekend event. She thought, this is it. This is the place after the holding pattern. And it's real. She thought, I'm ready. She went inside and told her mother she was happy, which was the first time she'd used the word in earnest in years, and her mother held her face in both hands and looked at her for a long moment and said simply, good. Just that, good. She went back to the diner one more time, not to work. Her last shift had been 2 months ago, a Friday in January, when Sandra had made a cake and Brianna had cried and Nora had promised to come back for the peppermint hot chocolate in December. She went back on a Tuesday afternoon in April on a whim because she was driving past on the way back from a vendor meeting and the parking lot was nearly empty and the windows were amber lit against the spring afternoon and something pulled at her. Sandra was at the counter. She looked up when the bell rang, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw Nora. Now a warmth that was also slightly nostalgic, the way you look at something that was yours for a while and isn't anymore, and you've made your peace with that. Soup's butternut squash again, Sandra said. I'll take a bowl, Nora said, and sat down at the window booth. She sat in the booth where Caleb had first sat on that rainy Thursday in October, and looked out at the park across the street. The gazebo was getting a fresh coat of paint, she could see. The trees were in full spring leaf. A woman was walking a dog along the far path. Sandra brought the soup. How's the hotel? Sandra said. Good, Nora said. Really good, actually. Brianna is going to apply for the events assistant job you posted, Sandra said. She hasn't told you yet. She's working up to it. Tell her she'd better work up to it faster, Nora said. The posting closes in 2 weeks. Sandra smiled, the real one, the one she rationed. And the other thing. Nora looked at the soup, at the window, at the park coming green outside in the April light. The other thing is very good too, she said. Sandra patted her once on the shoulder and went back to the counter. Nora ate her soup. Outside, the afternoon moved through its golden April stages, the light going long and soft, the shadows getting interested, the day beginning the slow lean toward evening. This was where it had started. This window, this booth, this rain. She thought about the version of herself who'd set that bowl of soup down in front of a stranger on a rainy Thursday night, and thought nothing more of it than that. Who'd been careful and waiting and quietly running out of reasons to keep waiting. Who'd had more inside her than she'd been asked to give, and had been waiting without quite knowing it for someone to ask. She finished her soup, left a good tip, waved to Sandra, walked out into the April afternoon and got in her car and called Caleb and said, I'm leaving Millbrook Diner, one last time. How was it? He said. Good, she said. Complete. You know that feeling when something is finished in the right way? Yes, he said. It was that. She could hear him smiling. Owen wants to know if you're coming Thursday. Where else would I be? She said. She pulled out of the parking lot and onto the Millbrook Street and drove toward home in the long April light, and behind her the diner windows glowed amber and steady in the late afternoon as they always had, as they probably always would. Some places hold you and let you go at the same time. She understood that now. She drove toward what was next. Spring deepened into something confident. The Harwick Hotel had a garden courtyard that Nora had seen in photographs during her interview, but hadn't fully understood until April opened it up, a narrow stone-paved rectangle with raised beds along the walls, old iron furniture and a vine-covered pergola that turned the afternoon light into something amber and filtered. Patricia had mentioned offhandedly that the courtyard had been underused for years. Too small for conventional events, too undefined in purpose, gathering mostly the overflow from functions that didn't know what to do with it. Nora had been thinking about the courtyard for 6 weeks. She put together a proposal on a Sunday afternoon at her mother's kitchen table with the thoroughness she applied to everything she decided mattered, a small events program built around the courtyard scale rather than in spite of it. Intimate dinners for 8 to 12, private anniversary celebrations, retirement gatherings for people who wanted something quieter than a ballroom, a monthly supper club that could build a community of regular guests, and generate consistent revenue in what would otherwise be off-peak shoulder nights. Patricia read the proposal in her office on a Tuesday morning while Nora sat across the desk and tried to look less invested in the outcome than she was. Patricia looked up. "How long did this take you?" "About 4 hours," Nora said. "I've been thinking about it longer. The financial projections are—" Patricia paused. "Conservative but credible. I didn't want to oversell. The vendor relationships you're suggesting, do you have existing contacts?" "Most of them," Nora said. "The florist is someone I've worked with. The caterer worked with the diner. The AV company is the one I used in February." She paused. "I've been building the network without a specific project. This is where it goes." Patricia was quiet for a moment. She tapped the edge of the proposal on her desk. "How much autonomy do you want?" she said. "Enough to execute it cleanly," Nora said. "I don't need the title. I need the authority to make decisions in the moment." Patricia looked at her for a long moment, the look of someone recognizing something they'd been hoping to find. "Okay," she said. "You have it. Give me a 6-month plan by Friday, and we'll greenlight the first event for late May." Nora walked back to her desk and sat down and looked at the calendar on her computer and thought, this is how it works. You build in the space you have with the tools you have, and eventually the space expands to meet what you've built. She texted Caleb, "I just got approved to run the courtyard program." He texted back 20 seconds later, "I knew you would. Tell me everything Thursday." She put her phone in her pocket and started the 6-month plan. Brianna applied for the events assistant position. Her cover letter arrived in Nora's inbox on a Wednesday morning, 3 days before the deadline, and Nora opened it and read it and sat back and thought, there's my letter of reference. This is already better than anything I'd write. Brianna had written about what she'd observed over 4 years of working alongside Nora at the diner, not in soft, flattering terms, but with the specific eye of someone who'd actually been paying attention. She described the way Nora had managed the holiday rush with 2 staff members out and hadn't lost a single order. The way she'd handled the regional manager who tried to cut breaks. The way she'd diagnosed and solved a kitchen communication problem in the first 2 weeks of a new cook's tenure without anyone asking her to. She sees what's wrong before it's wrong, Brianna had written. That's the skill that's impossible to teach. Nora forwarded the application to Patricia with a note, she's exceptional. I'll stake my recommendation on it. She called Brianna that evening. You applied, Nora said. I did, Brianna said. She sounded nervous, which was so unlike her that it was endearing. Your cover letter, Nora said, was better than mine was for this job. A pause. Was it, you're going to get it? Nora said. And if you don't, it's because the universe has made a clerical error. Brianna laughed, the relieved kind, the kind that releases pressure that's been building for a while. I was worried you'd think it was weird, she said. Me following you. You're not following me, Nora said. You're going where you already belong. There's a difference. Brianna was quiet for a moment. You sound like yourself, she said. A very good version of yourself. I've been working on it, Nora said. Owen turned 8 in May. The birthday party was at Caleb's apartment in Pittsburgh, a real apartment she'd discovered, not a penthouse, a 3-bedroom in a converted industrial building with high ceilings and concrete floors and one entire wall of windows that looked out over the river. It was not what she'd imagined, which had been glass and marble and all the aspirational vocabulary of significant wealth. It was warmer than that. Owen had a shelf in the living room dedicated entirely to things he was currently studying, rocks a dismantled clock, a model of the solar system he'd built with Caleb, a library book about sharks with a dozen post-it flags marking the interesting parts. She'd helped Caleb plan the party. 8 children, a curated set of activities that Owen had approved in writing. Owen had strong opinions about birthday party structure. A cake that was chocolate with salted caramel, because Owen had researched cake flavor profiles and determined this was objectively the best combination. She arrived early to help set up and found Caleb in the kitchen reading the instructions on the caramel sauce container with the focused alarm of a man who doesn't cook much and has promised something that requires cooking. I can do that, she said, coming in and setting down her bag. I have it, he said. You're holding the instructions upside down. He looked at the container, rotated it. I had it, he said. She laughed, took the container from him, and made the caramel sauce while he stood next to her at the counter and watched with the slightly humbled expression of someone who knows they're witnessing a competence they don't have. How do you know how to do everything? He said. I don't, she said. I know how to learn things and how to look like I already know them while I'm learning. She stirred the caramel. That's a different skill. It's a good one. Years in a diner, she said. You develop it or you don't last. The party arrived in the form of 8 children, which was more noise than the apartment had apparently ever contained, and Owen navigated it with his characteristic seriousness, thanking each guest when they arrived, managing the activities schedule, at one point quietly redirecting a minor dispute over the remote-controlled car activity with the diplomatic skill of someone who has thought about fairness a great deal. At the end of the afternoon, after the last guests had gone, and Owen had retreated to his room to examine his presents with the systematic attention they deserved. Nora and Caleb cleaned up the living room together, moving around each other with the ease of people who have learned each other's rhythms, and Caleb said, picking up a paper plate, He asked me something last week. Whether you were going to be here permanently. He said it simply looking at the plate. I told him I didn't know yet, that it wasn't a decision I got to make on my own. He said, and I'm quoting, then you should probably figure it out because I've already decided. She stood holding a stack of cups looking at him. 8 years old, she said. 7 technically at the time. He turned 8 today. He set the plate down and looked at her. I wanted to tell you, he said it. This isn't pressure. You know I don't do that. I know, she said. I just wanted you to know that he's not uncertain, even if the adults are still figuring it out. She set down the cups. She thought about Owen's shelf of projects, his carefully structured birthday party, his post-it flagged shark book. She thought about the drawing, the 2 of them eating pie at the same table still pinned up in the back of the diner near the coffee station, which Sandra had refused to take down, even after Nora left. She thought about what it meant to be included in a child's picture of home. I'm not uncertain, she said. I want you to know that. I haven't been uncertain for a while. I've just been moving at the pace that felt honest. He looked at her. And this pace, she said, feels honest. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him with the particular openness of someone who has stopped preparing for the worst, and he put his hands on either side of her face and kissed her for the first time, carefully, completely, with the seriousness of someone doing the exact right thing at the exact right moment. When it ended, she kept her eyes closed for a second, just holding the stillness of it. About time, she said. I was waiting for the right moment. It was 4 months ago, she said. He laughed. She felt it against her forehead. I was being careful, he said. So was I, she said. Apparently we're both terrible at this. We're improving, he said. We are, she agreed. From down the hall, Owen's door opened. He appeared in the doorway of the living room carrying a new book, a birthday present, and stopped when he saw them and looked at them with the expression of a child who has achieved a desired outcome and is choosing not to gloat, which was its own kind of extraordinary self-control. The caramel was good, he said to the room in general. Thank you, Nora said. Owen went back to his room. Caleb looked at Nora. Nora looked at Caleb. Your son, she said, is magnificent. I know, he said. I can't take credit for all of it. You can take some of it. Some, he agreed. She picked up the cups again, and he picked up the plates, and they finished cleaning the apartment, and the evening came in off the river, soft and May-warm, and Owen reappeared eventually with his book and sat on the couch and read, while the 2 adults moved around the kitchen making dinner, and the whole thing was quiet and ordinary in the way that only the most important things are. The decision about her mother's situation clarified itself in June, the way decisions do when you've been gathering information long enough for a clear direction to emerge from the accumulation. The specialist's recommendation had evolved not emergency care, not a facility, but a living situation that offered more built-in support than the house on her mother's own. The house had 2 floors and the stairs were becoming an issue. The yard required maintenance that was no longer manageable. The nearest pharmacy was 12 minutes away. Nora had been doing the math. She sat down with her mother on a Sunday in June at the kitchen table with the tea that had accompanied every significant conversation of their lives together, and laid out what she'd found: a ground floor apartment in a community in Millbrook that was not assisted living but adjacently supportive common spaces on site, medical coordination. A community that was social without being institutional. 5 minutes from the hotel, 10 minutes from Nora's apartment, which she'd moved into in March. Her mother looked at the brochure. "It's very nice," her mother said carefully. "You don't have to love it," Nora said. "You just have to be willing to try it." "I grew up in this house," her mother said. "I know." "I raised you in this house." "I know." Her mother looked at the table for a long moment. "I'm not afraid of going," she said. "I'm afraid that going means I'm—" She paused. "Declining. It means you're making a smart choice before you have to make a forced one," Nora said. "There's a difference. You taught me that difference. You said make choices while you have them, not after." Her mother looked at her. "I did say that," she said. "Frequently," Nora said. Her mother looked back at the brochure. Outside the kitchen window, the June garden was doing its early summer best. The roses that came every year without being asked, the hollyhocks that had self-seeded along the back fence, the apple tree that had been there since before either of them. "I want to take the hollyhock seeds with me," her mother said. "Done," Nora said. Her mother nodded slowly, the nod of someone accepting a thing they've decided to accept gracefully. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Nora said. They drank their tea in the garden that afternoon, one of the last times they would be in that garden together, in that particular way. Not the last time ever, just the last time, as the configuration of themselves they'd been for 4 years, the two of them in the house waiting for things to shift. Things had shifted. This was the proof of it. The afternoon light came through the hollyhocks and landed on the table, and her mother's hands, and Nora looked at those hands, strong, still lined. Now the hands of a woman who had held her life together with them and felt something that was not grief and was not relief, but was the specific tenderness of loving something clearly enough to see it as it is. "I'm proud of you," her mother said suddenly. "Mom, I'm allowed to say it. You've said it before. This is different. This is—" Her mother looked at the garden. "This is the specific proud of watching someone become who they were supposed to be. You were always going to be this. It just took a little longer than either of us expected." Nora set down her tea. "You made me," she said. "You know that." "You made yourself," her mother said firmly. "I just didn't get in the way." They were quiet for a while. The garden was very still in the June afternoon, the kind of stillness that has been earned by things that have grown. Nora thought this is what happiness actually looks like. Not the dramatic version, not the version in anyone's story. This afternoon, this garden, these 2 sets of hands around 2 mugs of tea, and the knowledge that the people she loved were going to be okay. That was the whole of it, and it was more than enough. Brianna got the job. She called Nora from the Harwick parking lot after her final interview, her voice doing the thing voices do when they're trying to contain something too big, a brightness pitched slightly too high, a speed that gave the game away. "I got it," she said. "I know," Nora said. "How do you know?" "Patricia texted me 20 minutes ago. She was waiting for you to call me first." Brianna made a sound that was either laughing or crying and was probably both. "I'm going to be working with you," she said. "That's insane." "It's entirely appropriate," Nora said. "You've been ready for this since the day I met you." "You were ready when I met you, and you waited 4 years," Brianna said. "I was gathering material," Nora said. "And so were you. Now we get to do something with it." Brianna started in the 3rd week of June, and Nora watched her first week with the specific satisfaction of recognizing in someone else the capacity she'd always seen from the outside. The quick reading of a room, the instinct for what needed doing before the ask was made, the way she talked to vendors like a peer, even on day 2 when she was still learning the filing system. On Friday of her first week, Brianna found Nora in the courtyard where Nora was reviewing the setup for the first supper club event scheduled for that Saturday. "This place," Brianna said, looking at the courtyard, the iron chairs, the lit lanterns, the evening jasmine starting to come in along the pergola. This is going to be something. Yes, Nora said. Did you design all of this? Most of it. Patricia had input on the financials. Brianna looked at the space. You built this from nothing. I built it from an empty courtyard and a Sunday afternoon, Nora said, which is roughly what everything starts as. The first supper club event happened on a Saturday in late June, and it was nearly perfect. Nearly because one of the 10 guests had an allergy that hadn't been on their intake form, which Nora caught 40 minutes before the meal started because she had gotten into the habit of calling her guests to confirm arrangements in the days before, and the guest had mentioned the allergy in passing and then been embarrassed that she hadn't put it on the form. Nora had the kitchen adjust with 40 minutes to spare, which was the difference between a problem and a story you tell later to demonstrate competence. The meal was beautiful. The space was warm. The guests, mostly in their 50s and 60s, the exact demographic she'd designed it for, arrived in couples and left as a community, exchanging cards and making vague plans that had the quality of actually intending to follow through. Caleb came. He wasn't there as a guest, not officially. He'd driven up from Pittsburgh on a Saturday for a reason he described as checking in on the project development in the area, which was true in the way that technically true things can be, and which Nora had not challenged because she was glad he was there, and she had too many things to manage to be properly coy about it. He sat at a small table near the pergola with a glass of wine and watched her work. She knew he was watching. She noticed the way you notice when a specific pair of eyes is following you with a quality of attention that is its own kind of warmth. At the midpoint of the evening, when the first course had gone, and the conversations at the tables had taken on the relaxed momentum of people who've had one glass of wine and found out they like each other, she crossed to his table and sat down for 5 minutes. How does it look from out here? She said. Like exactly what you said it would be, he said. You described it in March, and I'm watching it. And it's the same. That means I planned it correctly, she said. It means your vision was right, he said. That's different from just planning. She looked at the courtyard, the lit lanterns, the people she'd put together at the same table, now leaning toward each other over the remains of the first course, the jasmine coming off the pergola in the warm evening air. I built this, she said. It was a statement of fact. She was not boasting. She was marking it. You did, he said. 4 months ago, this was a locked courtyard with 3 broken chairs. Now it's this, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her from the very beginning, directly. Specifically, like she was the most interesting thing in any room she walked into. She'd spent months learning to receive that look without deflecting it. I need to go check the second course, she said. Go, he said. I'll be here. She went. She checked the second course. She circled the tables. She topped up 2 wine glasses, caught the eye of the server to redirect a tempo issue, and arrived back at her post near the entrance with the efficiency of someone who has been doing this particular kind of work for 20 years, minus 4 years, of doing a different version of it in a place that had prepared her for this one more thoroughly than she'd understood at the time. At the end of the evening, when the last guest had left and Brianna was cheerfully managing the breakdown, Caleb helped Nora stack the lanterns. You know, he said, handing her a lantern, I thought this courtyard idea was good when you told me about it, but I didn't fully... He paused. I didn't fully imagine it, what it would actually feel like to be in it. How does it feel? She said. He looked at her over the stack of lanterns. Like exactly the right thing in exactly the right place, he said. She accepted the lantern. That's what I was going for, she said. They loaded the van together. Brianna said goodnight with the slightly dazed energy of someone who has just run their first event and found out they can do it. The courtyard went dark and quiet behind them, and Nora stood in it for a moment alone after Caleb had gone to get his car. Feeling the garden hold the warmth of the evening the way good spaces do, like something that has been given energy and wants to keep it. She thought I made this. She thought I'm making a lot of things lately. She thought this is what it looks like when you stop waiting and start building. She turned off the last light and went to find Caleb. July was hot, and the Harwick summer program ran full, and Nora's courtyard suppers filled 3 weeks out, and she was managing more than she'd managed at any other point in her career, and she was not overwhelmed. This was the thing she discovered about herself operating at this scale. She was not overwhelmed. She was energized in a way she hadn't been since early in the Pittsburgh hotel job before the place had ground it out of her. This was the difference between doing the right work in the wrong context and doing the right work in the right one. She hired a part-time assistant, a local college student named Jerome, who was studying hospitality and who had applied with a cover letter that reminded her of her own first job application, confident in its inexperience, clear about its intentions, honest about what it didn't know. She hired him immediately. He was excellent from the first week and got better from there. She managed. She built. She went home at the end of each day with the specific tiredness of someone who has spent their energy on the right things, which is a different kind of tired than the hollowing variety. It has weight but not bitterness, and it fades by morning into something that feels close to readiness. On Thursday evenings, she was Caleb's. That was how she thought of it, not in the sense of possession, but in the sense of orientation. Thursday evenings, she was directed toward him the way a compass points north, not by force, not by obligation, but because that was simply where she pointed when she was free to point. They had dinner in Pittsburgh. They walked along the river. They went to a museum exhibit on mapping. Owen had chosen it, having developed a new interest in cartography, and he moved through it with his characteristic researcher focus, while the two adults followed and talked about the maps, the way adults talk about things their children show them, finding in the subject more than they expected. "You know what I like about maps?" Nora said in front of a medieval maritime chart that was both beautiful and wildly inaccurate, the coastlines wandering away from geography into aspiration. "Tell me," Caleb said. "They show you where you are and where you could go," she said. "At the same time. The same image does both things." He looked at the map for a moment. "That's us," he said quietly. She looked at him. "This," he said, "what we're in. It's that. We know where we are, and we can see where we could go. Same image." She was quiet for a moment. Owen appeared from around the corner of the next exhibit, reported that the ancient Egyptian cartographic tradition was ahead of its time in some ways and behind in others, and moved on. Caleb watched him go. "I love him so much," Caleb said. "It was simple and complete." "So do I," Nora said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I know," he said. He said it like something he'd known for a long time and was grateful to hear aloud. Owen reappeared from the next room. "There's a section on stars," he said, "as navigation tools. I think that's relevant." "Lead the way," Nora said. He led the way. They followed, and the afternoon moved around them full of old maps and new directions, and both things were true at the same time, the same image, the same frame, where they were and where they were going, and the steady, bright knowledge that they were going there together. The crisis at the hotel came in August on a Tuesday in the form of a phone call from a client whose wedding rehearsal dinner, booked 8 months in advance, 120 guests. The largest event Nora had managed at the Harwick was 4 days away when the primary caterer called to say they were pulling out. The reason was legitimate: a kitchen fire, partial equipment loss, no capacity to deliver at scale in 4 days. The caterer was apologetic and fully at fault in the sense of having been let down by circumstance rather than negligence, and none of that mattered at all because 120 people were expecting dinner in 4 days, and Nora had to make that happen. She called Patricia. Patricia said, "Tell me what you need." "Authorization to spend up to 15% over the contract budget if necessary," Nora said. "And 3 hours without interruption." "You have it, but," Patricia said. She worked through the morning. She called 7 caterers in the region, got 2 who could potentially deliver, and spent 3 hours on logistics, tasting confirmations and equipment coordination until she had a solution that was not identical to what had been planned. But was she judged honestly better in 2 significant ways? The new caterer did a specific regional menu that suited the client's stated aesthetic preferences more accurately, and the renegotiated table layout opened up a dance floor the original plan had sacrificed. She called the client at 2 p.m. "I have to tell you that your original caterer has had to withdraw," she said, And I have to tell you that I have a solution, and I want you to hear the solution before you have any feelings about the first part. The client, a woman named Patricia herself, which Nora was choosing not to find poetic, was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, tell me the solution, she told her, completely specifically with the menu details and the layout change, and the reason why the layout change was actually an improvement. The client was quiet again. You're telling me it's better? The client said. I'm telling you it's different, and I believe it's better, Nora said. The regional menu is more specific to the vision you described in our initial meeting, and the dance floor is something you mentioned wanting, and then said you'd sacrifice for capacity. I did say that. You don't have to sacrifice it anymore. The client exhaled. Okay, she said. I trust you. 3 words that Nora carried for the rest of the day like something valuable. The rehearsal dinner happened on a Friday evening and was by multiple unsolicited accounts the best event the Harwick had hosted in years. The regional menu was a revelation. The dance floor got used until 11 p.m. The client found Nora at the end of the evening and said very quietly, "Thank you for not panicking." I panicked a little, Nora said honestly, just not out loud. The client laughed. That's the skill, she said, not the absence of it, the containment. After the guests were gone and the breakdown was underway, Nora sat on the low wall of the courtyard with her shoes off and a glass of the good wine they'd had on the rehearsal menu and called Caleb. It worked, she said. I had no doubt, he said. I had about 20 minutes of doubt, she said. Tuesday morning, before I started making calls. What turned it? I stopped thinking about what had gone wrong and started thinking about what I had to work with, she said. I've been in harder spots with fewer resources. I just needed to remember that. You need to hear that more often, he said. Not from me, from yourself. She was quiet for a moment. The courtyard was very still. The lanterns had been left on, throwing their warm light across the iron furniture, and the summer jasmine coming heavy now along the pergola. You're good for me, she said. It was simple and direct, and she meant it completely. I'm trying, he said. You succeed consistently, she said. I don't say it enough. You're saying it now. She leaned back against the wall of the courtyard, looking up at the August sky, dark and close, too much ambient light for stars, but there above it all. There's something I've been thinking about, she said. Tell me. Not on the phone, she said. Thursday. He was quiet for a moment. That sounds significant. It might be, she said, or it might just be a thing I've been thinking, but I want to say it to your face. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. She hung up and sat in the courtyard for a few more minutes in the warm August dark with the wine and the smell of jasmine and the satisfying tiredness of a thing done well. She thought about what she was going to say on Thursday. She'd been thinking it for weeks, circling it, approaching and retreating, which she recognized now as her particular way with the things that mattered most. Not avoidance. Approach at the right speed. She was ready to say it. She was ready for a lot of things. She got up, put on her shoes, and went to find Brianna to check the breakdown status. The evening was almost done. Something else was beginning. Thursday came. She drove to Pittsburgh in the early evening windows down the late August air, finally doing something other than pressing in with heat, a loosening of first suggestion of the season turning. The river, when she came over the bridge, caught the last of the light in a long bronze line. Caleb was in the kitchen when she arrived. Owen was at the table with his homework, which he paused to greet her with the gravity of a person interrupted at important work who is nonetheless glad to be interrupted. We're having the pasta you taught my dad to make, Owen said. He practiced twice this week. Nora looked at Caleb, who had the expression of a man whose helpful son has just disclosed something he'd intended to keep private. How did the practice rounds go? She said. Edibles, Caleb said. By the second attempt. High standard, she said. She helped set the table while Caleb finished the pasta, and Owen completed his homework with concentrated efficiency. The way he approached everything, not rushed, not dawdled, just the right amount of time applied to a known task. When they sat down, the three of them at the table by the windows over the river, The evening light making everything soft-edged and gold, she felt the thing she always felt in this apartment. Now the quality of being somewhere she had chosen and was still choosing every time she arrived. They ate. Owen talked about cartography. He had extended his museum interest into a school project that was now sprawling in the pleasantly unwieldy way of projects pursued with genuine obsession. Caleb talked about a board meeting that had been interesting for reasons unrelated to the business agenda, which Nora parsed as a story about organizational dynamics that was actually quite funny. She talked about the rehearsal dinner, the near-crisis the regional caterer who had turned out to be better than the original. After dinner, Owen excused himself to finish the cartography project. He had a deadline he took very seriously, and the apartment went quiet in the way it did when it was just the two of them and the river outside and the summer evening doing its slow dissolution. They were washing dishes she'd insisted Caleb had acquiesced, and she was standing at the sink and he was drying, and she said without looking away from the water, "I've been thinking about the future." "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. He was holding a bowl and looking at her steadily, waiting. "I love you," she said. "I've been thinking about that, and about what comes after that, and about what I want the shape of my life to be. And I've been careful. I've been careful for so long that careful became a reflex I didn't examine." She looked back at the sink. "I'm done being careful about this. I know what I want." He set down the bowl. She turned off the water and turned to face him. "I want you. I want this. I want Owen to be able to assume I'm going to be here, not as a visitor, not as a regular Thursday presence. I want—" She paused. "I want to build something with you, deliberately, on purpose, with my eyes open." He was very still. Not the careful stillness she'd learned to read as processing something else. Something more like the stillness of someone who has been waiting for a long time and cannot quite believe the wait is over. "I've wanted to say something like that since February, Ket," he said. "Why didn't you—" "Because I was waiting for you to be ready," he said. "And I would have waited a lot longer." "I know," she said. "That's part of why I love you." He crossed the kitchen and held her face in his hands and kissed her in the way that was not the careful first kiss of May, but something more settled and certain, the kiss of two people who know exactly what they're doing and are not surprised by any of it. From down the hall, Owen's door opened. "I need to know the correct term for when a map projection distorts the shapes," Owen called. "Conformal distortion," Nora called back. A pause. "How did you know that?" Owen said. "I looked it up," she said. "Last Sunday. I thought you'd ask." A longer pause. "That's really helpful," Owen said, and then to himself audible down the hall, "I knew she'd know." Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. "He's been hoping you'd be here permanently," he said, "since approximately October." "Smart kid," she said. "The smartest young," he agreed. Outside, the river moved through the August dark, and the city made its usual sounds. And in the kitchen of the apartment, with the high ceilings and the industrial floors and the wall of windows over the river, two people stood in the dish soap and evening air smell of an ordinary evening and let themselves be exactly as happy as they'd been quietly working toward. It was not fireworks. It was not fate announcing itself. It was better than that. It was real. September arrived carrying the specific quality of change that September always carried, the particular quality of a season that knows it's transitioning something and has decided to do it beautifully. The trees along the park, across from the diner, began their first slow turning. The Harwick Hotel's autumn calendar filled with events that required warming harvest dinners, anniversary celebrations, the kind of gatherings people organized when the year began to close in, and they wanted to be somewhere warm and lit and surrounded by the people who mattered. Nora's Courtyard program, which she'd launched in the spring as an experiment, was now the Harwick's highest-rated offering by guest feedback, and she was expanding it a second seating on Friday nights, a monthly private dinner series for returning guests, a partnership with a local winery that had been building steadily since she'd met the owner at one of the first suppers. She was not keeping up. She was running ahead, pulling the work toward her, and the work was meeting her there. Patricia called her in on a Monday in the third week of September and offered her a formal promotion, director of guest experience, encompassing all events, front-of-house guest relations, and the Courtyard program with a direct line to ownership. The salary was something she hadn't earned before, not at any job, and she held it in her mind for a moment before she said yes, held it the way you hold something good to confirm that it's real, the way you press your thumb against a coin to be sure it's solid. You've been doing this work for 6 months, Patricia said. I should have made it formal 3 months ago. You were watching, Nora said. I would have done the same. That's the thing about you, Patricia said. You're building the ladder, and you understand why I need to watch you climb it. Most people want the title before they've earned the ground. I've been on the other side of that, Nora said. I know what it looks like. She went back to her office. Her office, not a shared workspace, a room with a door and a window that looked into the courtyard, and sat down and looked at the courtyard through the glass. The jasmine was past its peak but still present, and someone had put small pumpkins along the low wall, which was either Brianna's doing or Jerome's. She looked at the space she'd built, the lanterns, the iron chairs, the pergola, the fall light coming through the vines, and felt the things she'd been trying to feel for most of her adult life, and had been calling by the wrong names. Not pride, not relief, not the absence of fear. Ownership. The specific, clear-earned feeling of having made something that was yours. She picked up her phone and called Caleb. I got the promotion, she said. A beat. Then, tell me everything. She moved her mother into the new apartment at the end of September. The process of moving is in practice the process of deciding what matters, what comes with you, what stays behind, what you've been holding on to out of habit rather than attachment. Her mother moved through the house with the methodical calm of a woman who had been preparing for this more thoroughly than she'd let on, filling boxes with the things she was taking and leaving, the rest with a tidiness that said she'd already made peace with every object she was setting down. The hollyhock seeds came, the tea service that had been her grandmother's, 3 photograph albums, the quilt from the bedroom, which was 30 years old and had been repaired twice with fabric from other quilts that were themselves 30 years old, a textile lineage that Nora thought of as the most honest kind of heirloom, not perfect, but mended, made to last by caring. Owen helped carry boxes. He had not been asked to. Caleb had brought him to help move the heavier furniture, and Owen had taken it upon himself to manage the smaller boxes with the seriousness of someone who understood that this was important and wanted to be useful to the importance. He carried each box with both arms and his full concentration and set each one down carefully, and at the end of the day, when the apartment was arranged in a way that had already begun to look like a place rather than a move, he sat on the couch next to Nora's mother and said, "It smells like your cookies." Nora's mother looked at him. "I made some. They're in the kitchen." Owen looked pleased. "I thought it might be the box," he said, "but actual cookies are better." Her mother patted his hand in the specific way of someone who has decided to love a child and does so without ceremony. "You can come any time you want cookies," she said. "Even on school days," Owen said with the innocent audacity of a child testing a newly discovered resource. "On weekends," her mother said firmly. Owen accepted this with grace. At the end of the day, when the moving van was gone and the boxes were unpacked and Nora's mother was in her new kitchen making tea, by heart, Nora stood in the living room and looked at the space. The quilt was on the couch. The photograph albums were on the shelf. The hollyhock seeds were in a small container on the windowsill waiting for spring. It looked like home. Not the old home, a new one, but unmistakably hers. Caleb appeared beside her. "She seems settled," he said. "She is," Nora said. "She made peace with this before I did, I think. She's a strong person." "She's the reason I'm a strong person," Nora said. He took her hand. Just that, the familiar steadiness of it. "She likes you," Nora said. "I know, she told me." "When did she tell you that?" "Last month. When you were in the kitchen and she had me alone for approximately 4 minutes. He paused. "She was very specific about the fact that she has opinions and will share them freely, and that this was not a warning, but a statement of approach." Nora laughed. "That's very her." "It is," he said. "I liked her more after that." They stood in the living room of the new apartment while Nora's mother made tea in the kitchen, and Owen explored the building's common areas with the investigative energy of someone mapping new territory, and the September evening came in through the windows soft and golden, and Nora looked at the quilt and the photographs, and the hollyhock seeds, and thought about what it meant to build a home, not find one, not fall into one, not have one given to you. Build one. Choose every element. Set it down where you mean it to stay. She was very good at building things. October wrapped them in the particular sweetness of a season that knows how to be beautiful about ending. Nora's life had taken a shape she could see from above, now the Harwick expanding under her hands. Her mother settled and beginning to Nora's genuine pleasure to make friends in her new community with the same quiet social ease she'd always had. Brianna developing into exactly the professional Nora had seen in her running the Friday Supper Club with a confidence that made Nora's job easier every week. Jerome, who had started asking questions about the Courtyard program's design philosophy, that told her he was thinking at the right level and would be doing her job within 3 years. And Caleb, Owen. The three of them had established a rhythm that was both easy and deliberate. Weekends in Pittsburgh when her schedule permitted, which was most of them now. Thursdays as sacred. Owen's Sunday calls, which she had started supplementing with her own midweek texts. A fact she'd read a question about the cartography project. The occasional photograph of something at the hotel she thought he'd find interesting. He always responded with precision and occasionally with additional research she hadn't asked for, but invariably found useful. She had started keeping a few things at the apartment. Not much a change of clothes, a book The Good Coffee she'd introduced Caleb to in April and which he now considered essential. Small things. The slow accumulation of a presence that was becoming less visitor and more resident. Nobody had made a formal announcement about this. The formal announcement was happening in the way that mattered incrementally quietly through the specific language of shared daily life. She was for the first time in years not living in a holding pattern. She was just living. The night that settled, everything happened in October on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, not a special occasion, just an ordinary Tuesday when she'd driven to Pittsburgh after work for no planned reason other than that she'd wanted to. She arrived and let herself in with the key Caleb had given her in August, which she hadn't made a production of, and neither had he. And Owen was at the table with his cartography project in its final sprawling phase, and Caleb was reading in the armchair by the windows with the river dark beyond, and neither of them looked up for a moment because neither of them was surprised she was there. That was the moment. Not the first conversation, not the dinner, not the first kiss, not the declaration in the kitchen in August. This the Tuesday evening in October, when she walked in and was simply unremarkably expected. She set her bag down and went to the kitchen and looked in the refrigerator and said, "There's leftover soup. Do you both want soup?" "Yes, please," Owen said, not looking up from his project. Caleb put down his book. He looked at her from across the room, the kitchen light on her, her coat still half on her hand on the refrigerator door. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her since the very beginning, with that directness and that warmth and that specific attention. "Yes," he said. "I'd love soup." She heated the soup. She set 3 bowls on the table. Owen put away his project with characteristic neatness, not because he was asked, but because he'd been raised by someone who understood that shared spaces required shared maintenance. They sat down together. Owen picked up his spoon, looked at the soup, looked at Nora. "Did you season it differently?" "Added a little thyme," she said. "It was missing something." Owen tasted it, considered. "Better," he said. "Thank you," she said. Caleb was watching them. The particular watch he had for moments like this, not sentimental, not manufactured, just present to what was actually happening. "This is good," he said. It was not about the soup, or not only about the soup. "It is short," she said. It was not about the soup at all. They ate. Owen reported on the final stage of the cartography project, which was now so elaborate it had grown a bibliography. The river made its dark way beyond the windows. The apartment was warm. 3 people sat around a table over a bowl of soup and were simply and completely where they meant to be. November. Her mother had filled her windowsill with the last of the fall plants and was talking about what she'd do with the hollyhock seeds in spring. Brianna had been offered a full-time coordinator role and had taken it with the equanimity of someone who had expected it and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The Harwick's year-end numbers were strong enough that Patricia had called her in to discuss next year's program expansion. Jerome had been given additional responsibility and was meeting it better than Nora had expected, which was saying something. On the first Saturday in November, Caleb drove to Millbrook. Not to the Harwick, not to her apartment, to the diner. She found out afterward from Sandra, who called with the barely contained quality of someone delivering a story they've been holding since it happened. "He came in for soup," Sandra said. "The butternut squash. And he ate it, and he left a very good tip, and he said—" Sandra paused for effect because Sandra knew how to tell a story. "He said this was the best decision I've ever made coming here. And I said the soup, and he said the soup was good too." Nora sat with that for a long time. She called Caleb. "You went to the diner." A pause. "Sandra called you." "Sandra called me?" "I figured she would." He was quiet for a moment. "I just wanted to see it. The place. Without you there, without the whole context of everything. Just the space where it started." "How was it?" "Good," he said. "Quiet. The soup was as good as advertised." He paused. "I wanted to understand it. What you did there for 4 years and what it gave you. Because whatever it gave you is part of who you are, and I—" He stopped. "I'm grateful for all of it. Even the parts that were hard. Because they're in you and you're—" He stopped again. He was not a man who ran out of words often. "I'm what," she said. "Everything," he said. Simply. With the specific weight of a man who has thought about the word before saying it. She stood in her kitchen in her Millbrook apartment and looked out the window at the November street, the bare trees, the last of the afternoon light going thin and gold above the rooftops. "I'm going to want you to say that again someday," she said. "When I'm having a bad week." "I'll say it as many times as you need," he said. December again. A year since the first snow. A year since he'd waited on the bench outside the diner to watch the first snowfall with her. She made her mother's sweet potato casserole for Christmas in her own kitchen now, and brought it to her mother's apartment where the three of them ate her mother, Nora, and Caleb, who had driven up from Pittsburgh and whom her mother had greeted with the specific welcome of someone who has stopped treating a person as a guest and started treating them as a given. Owen was with Caleb's sister for Christmas, which was the arrangement they'd had since Claire died a holiday, divided carefully attentively in the way two families that love the same child learn to do. He called at noon to report that his aunt's dog had knocked over the Christmas tree, which he found statistically predictable given the dog's established pattern of behavior, and to say that he'd made something for Nora that he would give her Thursday. "I'll be there Thursday," she said. "I know," he said. After dinner, she and Caleb walked through Millbrook in the dark, through the streets she'd grown up in, and left and come back to, and stopped thinking of as small. The Christmas lights were on in the windows of the houses, and the snow had fallen earlier in the week, and was still white on the lawns, and the park across from the diner was quiet and lit. They stopped on the bench. She hadn't planned it. They just stopped there because it was where they'd stopped a year ago, and some things deserved to be returned to. "A year," she said. "Almost," he said. "Different from what you expected." He looked at her. "Better," he said. "Harder and better than I expected. You're harder than I expected." "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation," he said. "You push back on things. You correct me when I'm wrong. You disagree with considerable precision. Is that—" "It's the best thing," he said. "After years of people managing me rather than talking to me, you just talk to me." He paused. "It's the best thing." She looked at the park, white in the winter dark, at the diner windows still amber and warm across the street. "I spent 4 years in that diner," she said, "carrying plates and listening to people and learning how to read a room and building something I couldn't name yet. And I thought, not always consciously, but somewhere in me, I thought I was waiting for my life to start." She paused. "But it was already started. It was already the thing I was going to need. All the patience and the management of difficult people and the knowing how to make someone feel taken care of it was all going somewhere. I just couldn't see where yet." He was quiet. "It came here," she said. "All of it. Everything I built in that diner, it brought me here." He took her hand, the familiar warmth of it, the steady, specific weight. And here is, he said, here is exactly where I want to be. She said. The snow on the park was very white, the diner windows were very warm. Above Millbrook, the December sky was doing what it had done that first night a year ago, clear and dark and full of stars, the weather having pressed all the cloud away to reveal the clean truth of what was always there. She looked up. He looked at her. Looking up, which was how he always did, watching her see things, finding the things more interesting in her seeing of them. Caleb, she said. Yeah, I'm happy. She said it the way her mother had taught her to say true things, plain, without decoration, with the confidence of someone who knows what they know. I want you to know that. Not because anything is fixed or finished, it isn't, but because this, the whole of this, the work and the apartment and my mother in her new place with her hollyhock seeds and Owen and you, this is my life, the one I'm actually in, and I'm happy in it. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that absorbs something. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know that there's no correct answer. There's no pressure in the question, and I'm asking because I want to and not because I think you should say yes. She turned to look at him. He looked at her with those steady, serious eyes, the same eyes she'd seen that first rainy Thursday, the ones that had looked at her like she was worth looking at and had never stopped. Will you stay? He said, permanently. Whatever shape that takes. Millbrook, Pittsburgh, both figured out as we go. Just stay. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the holding pattern, about the 4 years of careful and appropriate and okay, about the woman who'd been circling and couldn't find the runway. She had found it. She was on it. She had been for months. Yes, she said. It came out simple and whole and without hesitation because it was a decision she'd already made in 100 smaller decisions, and this was just the naming of it. He smiled, the full one, the rare one, the one that changed his whole face. She put her head against his shoulder there on the bench in front of the diner where it had all started, and they sat in the December dark while Millbrook went quiet around them, and above them the stars did their steady ancient work, and the diner windows glowed warm against the cold, and across the park the snow held everything still and white and clean. She had served a man a bowl of soup on a rainy Thursday night, and thought nothing of it. She had been wrong about that. It had been everything. And here on the bench in the December dark, a year later, everything felt at last completely without reservation, exactly like enough. She had given him a warm meal on the worst night of a very hard year. He had given her the courage to remember that she deserved a warm life. They had built the rest together, the way the best things are built carefully, honestly, with both hands open and with all the time in the world. Thursday came as Thursday always did. Owen gave her the thing he'd made for Christmas, a small, hand-drawn map of Millbrook rendered in the careful lines of a cartographer in training with the diner marked, and her apartment marked, and the Harwick Hotel marked, and the park with the bench, and in the bottom corner in his block print. Places that matter. Made by Owen W. Age 8. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. You put everything on it, she said. The important things, he said. That's what maps are for. You told me that they show you where you are and where you could go. You remembered. I remember everything you say, he said with the simple matter-of-factness of someone stating an obvious truth. She folded it carefully and put it in her bag, and she did not cry, which required effort. And Owen, who was watching with his usual attentiveness, seemed to understand this, and moved tactfully to the subject of the pasta they were having for dinner, which was a grace she recognized as exactly his father's. She framed the map that weekend and put it on the wall of her office, at the Harwick, next to Owen's drawing from the diner, the two of them eating pie, Owen W., age 7. 2 maps, one to the past, one to the present. Both of them real. By February, she had been at the Harwick for a year. Patricia marked the occasion by announcing in the team meeting that the Courtyard program had generated more 5-star reviews in its first year than the hotel's flagship ballroom events, which prompted a round of genuine applause from colleagues who had watched the empty Courtyard turn into the thing it had become. Jerome, who had never entirely mastered the concealment of his opinions, looked proud in the specific way of someone who had been part of building something from the beginning. Brianna had been promoted formally, this time to coordinator, with her own direct line of client relationships. She was good in ways that Nora had always seen and was now watching the world confirm, which was one of the better varieties of being right. After the meeting, Nora stood in the courtyard for a moment in the February cold, looking at the space under its winter aspect, the vines dormant, the raised beds quiet, the iron furniture doing what iron furniture does in cold weather, which is simply enduring until warm weather returned and asked it to be useful again. She thought about the year, all of it, the job, the courtyard, her mother's move, the rehearsal dinner crisis, the supper club, the museum, the river, Owen's maps and drawings, and careful weekly calls, the kitchen in August, the bench in December. She thought a year ago I was a person who worked in a diner and drove to medical appointments and read library books about management theory and told herself it was enough. It hadn't been enough. She'd known that. She just needed the circumstances to move. The circumstances had moved. She had moved. She went back inside. Spring returned. Her mother planted the hollyhock seeds in the small raised bed outside her apartment window with Owen's assistance. He'd volunteered, having developed an interest in gardening as an extension of his broader interest in systems and growth, and he had researched hollyhock cultivation with characteristic thoroughness and presented his findings to her mother in a way that made her mother say afterward that she was considering revising her views on 8-year-olds. "He talked to me like I was a person," her mother said to Nora over the phone that evening. "He talks to everyone like they're a person," Nora said. "It's his best quality." "He learned it from his father," her mother said. "Some of it," Nora said. "And some of it from you," her mother said. "Don't underestimate what you've given that child." She sat with that for a long moment after she hung up. She had not set out to give Owen anything. She'd just been herself, consistent, present, honest, the way she'd learned to be through years of being the person people came back to in a diner, the person who remembered and was reliable and could be counted on to do what she said she'd do. It turned out that was enough. It turned out that was quite a lot. The evening that closed the year happened in April, on a night when Millbrook had finally fully given itself over to spring. The park across from the diner green and blooming, the trees in full new leaf, the bench by the park, that meant something particular to both of them. She had planned a small dinner at the Harwick courtyard, not an official event, just 8 people, her Caleb Owen, her mother, Caleb's sister Elaine, Brianna Jerome, and Patricia, who was not a person Nora had expected to bring into her personal life, and who had arrived there anyway through the gradual gravity of genuine respect. She'd planned the menu herself. She'd set the lanterns. She'd done the flowers. She'd let Brianna run the evening's logistics, not as a test, but because it was Brianna's and she'd earned it, and she'd sat at the table with the people she'd built her life around and let the evening happen around her. It was the first event she'd run as a guest of. She sat at the table between her mother and Owen and looked at the courtyard, the lanterns, the evening jasmine, coming back now. In its second season, the spring air warm and specific, and felt the particular fullness of a room she'd built being full. Caleb across the table caught her eye. She looked at him. He looked at her. No words required. They'd gotten past the words for this kind of thing, to the point where the look itself was the whole language. Owen on her left was explaining to her mother the principles of cartographic projection. Her mother was listening with complete attention, which was her highest form of courtesy and which Nora thought fully deserved. She thought about the first night, the rain, the booth, the bowl of soup. She thought about everything that had come from that bowl of soup, the whole accumulated reality of it. The courtyard, the promotion, the apartment, her mother's hollyhock seeds, Owen's maps, this table, these people, this spring evening that smelled like jasmine and good food, and the specific generous warmth of a place that had been made for exactly this. She thought, look what I built. She thought, look what we built. She picked up her wine glass. Caleb, watching her, picked up his. "What are we drinking to?" her mother asked. Nora looked at the table, at the people, at the courtyard she'd made from nothing. "To the soup," she said. Owen looked up from his cartography lecture. "What soup?" "The soup that started everything," Caleb said. Owen considered this. "Butternut squash and tomato bisque," Nora said. "October, 2 years ago." Owen thought about this. "I wasn't there for that part," he said. No, Nora said. But you showed up right after. Owen seemed satisfied with this. He picked up his water glass. To the soup, he said with the gravity of a toast giver who means it. They raised their glasses. The lanterns burned warm in the courtyard. The jasmine moved in the slight spring breeze. Above Millbrook, the April sky was deepening into the particular dark of an evening that hasn't fully let go of the light, that luminous interval between day and night, where anything seems possible and the world looks like it was made with intention. She looked at all of it, the table, the lanterns, the people, the sky. She thought, this is the life. Not a prelude to it, not a holding pattern waiting for it. This. She had served a bowl of soup to a stranger on a rainy Thursday night, and he had come back and she had let herself be seen, and she had done the slow, careful work of building something real from the ground up, and the ground had held. It was holding still. It would hold for a long time, she was sure of it. But the Harwick Spring Gala was the largest event Nora had ever run. It had been Patricia's idea, an annual showcase. She'd said something that would anchor the hotel in the regional social calendar, the way the best properties always had an anchor event that people planned their spring around. She'd handed it to Nora with the confidence of someone who had stopped hedging their bets about capability. 240 guests, a live quartet, a 5-course dinner. The courtyard opening up into the ballroom with the garden doors thrown wide, the two spaces linked for the first time, the jasmine carrying in from outside and mixing with the candlelight and the music inside, which was exactly the effect she'd been building toward since she first looked at that dead courtyard in January. She managed the evening from behind the curtain the way she always had, not absent, not hovering, but present in the way water is present in a pipe, making everything run without being seen. She moved through the evening with the smooth efficiency of someone doing the work they were made for, catching problems before they were problems, adjusting tempo. Reading the room. At one point, just after the third course, she found herself standing near the garden doors, looking at the full room. The tables, the candles, the quartet playing something quiet and beautiful, the guests leaning toward each other in the particular lean of people who are having an evening they will remember. Brianna appeared beside her. "This is spectacular," she said quietly. "Yes," Nora said. "You built this." "We built this," Nora said. "You've been here for most of the important parts." Brianna looked at her. "How does it feel?" Nora thought about how to answer that honestly. She looked at the room she'd built, not just the event, but the years of preparation that made the event possible. The diner, the library books, the long, careful, patient accumulation of skill that she'd carried around like something waiting for its place. "Like it was always going to be this," she said. "Like all the parts were going in this direction, even when I couldn't see the direction." Brianna nodded. She understood, or would. At the end of the evening, after the last guest had gone and the breakdown was underway, Nora stood in the courtyard alone. The lanterns were still lit. The jasmine was very present in the spring night air. The tables were being cleared quietly inside, and the music was over, and the evening had become that specific silence that comes after a full room empties, not absence, but aftermath, the space still warm with what it had held. She thought about the year, both years really, the before year and the after year, the October rain and everything since. She thought about service, what it actually meant. Not the diminished version she'd been afraid of all her life, the version that meant giving yourself away until there was nothing left but the real version, the attentive, skilled, deliberate care for other people's experience that required more of you, not less. The waitress who remembered what you ordered because she was actually paying attention. The events director who caught the allergy because she'd called to confirm. The woman on the bench who listened with her whole self because she knew what it was to need someone to. Service, she thought, was not what she'd been afraid of. Service was what she was, and she had found at last the right place to offer it. Not as a diminishment, but as a gift she was glad to give in work and in love and in the family. She was quietly, deliberately building with a careful man and his brilliant son and the steadying presence of her mother with her hollyhock seeds and her grandmother's tea service. She put out the last lantern and walked through the hotel and out into the spring night. Caleb was waiting on the steps. He'd come for the end of the evening because that was the kind of man he'd turned out to be, the kind who showed up when the work was over, not to take credit for any of it, just to be there when she came out. How was it? He said. Perfect, she said. Almost. Almost. The quartet played one number too many, she said. Third set last song. The room was ready to move on, and they held it one song too long. He looked at her. You've been running a 200-person gala, and you noticed the quartet's fourth number. I noticed everything, she said. That's my job. He shook his head slowly in the specific way of someone who has been delighted by a person for a long time and expects to be delighted for a long time more. Come on, he said. I'll drive. She went down the steps and took his hand, and they walked to his car through the April night under the trees that were doing their generous spring thing, and behind them the Harwick Hotel stood lit and solid and full of the evening that had just ended, and ahead of them the road went toward whatever came next, and Nora Callahan, director of guest experience, daughter and friend and partner, and the best judge of a room she'd ever been told she was walked into it, with both eyes open, and her whole self present, and not 1 ounce of doubt in her body about where she was going. She was already there. She had been for a while. She just hadn't had the right words for it until now. Home, she thought. That was the word. Home. 2 summers later, Owen found the drawing in a box. He'd been looking for something else. A rock from his collection he was fairly certain hadn't moved when he came across the folder from 2nd grade, and inside the folder on slightly faded paper the drawing he'd made at age 7, the 2 figures in the diner both eating pie. Owen W., age 7. He brought it to the kitchen where Nora was making coffee, and Caleb was reading in the particular Saturday morning configuration that had become the reliable shape of their weekends. I found this piece, Owen said, setting it on the table. Nora looked up. She knew what it was immediately. You found the original. There's a copy at the hotel, Owen said. I know, but this is the original. He looked at the drawing for a moment. I drew this when I was 7. You did, she said. Before anything was decided, Mom, he said. Before you worked at the hotel, before you and Dad were... He paused. Before any of it. Yes, she said. Owen looked at the drawing with the thoughtful attention of a 10-year-old who has been thinking carefully about something and is choosing how to say it. I drew it the way I wanted it to be, he said. Both of us at the same table, like we were the same kind of people. The kitchen was very quiet. We are the same kind of people, she said. Owen looked at her. He had his father's eyes steady, direct, capable of a patience that was unusual in people of any age, and he looked at her with all of them. I know, he said. That's what I was trying to say. He took the drawing and put it back in the folder and went to look for his rock, and Caleb looked at Nora over his coffee cup, and she looked back at him, and the Saturday morning continued in its easy way. The coffee, the paper, the sound of Owen in the next room conducting a systematic search, the spring light on the table, the river doing its unhurried thing beyond the windows. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm up. Their fingers closed together. Outside, the city went about its ordinary Saturday business, and 2 people sat at a kitchen table in the warm morning light and held on. That was the whole of it, and it was more than enough.